The Senate Committee on Foreign Relations will come to order. Welcome, Senator Rubio. Before we start, I'll tell you what we're going to do here. I'm going to make an opening statement. Senator Shaheen is. We will then defer to Senator Rubio. Then we'll go. Excuse me. He took your chair and thinks he's running the place now, kind of like you did. Anyway. We'll then have your statement, Secretary Rubio, and then we're going to open it up to a round of 5-minute questions. Before we talk any further about what we're going to do, I want to talk a little bit about what we're not going to do. As you know, since I've taken chair of the committee, we have a zero tolerance on any kind of protests, on any kind of attempt by anyone in the audience to contact, influence, or in any way communicate with either the witness or people that are here on the dais. So that includes no signs, no standing up, obviously no shouting or comments. And so you'll be interested to hear, Secretary Rubio, since you were here last time, it's been calm and quiet. We haven't had to run anybody out of here. But if we have a problem, you'll be taken into custody and banned from the coming into this room for the next year. So with that, I would like to say a warm welcome back, Senator Rubio. We're always glad to have you here and so glad you're happy to spend time with us. You picked up a little bit more responsibility since we saw you last time, but you don't look any worse for the wear, so I think you can handle it. And it's good to have you here again. Under President Trump and your work at the department, this administration has accomplished incredible things in a short period of time. To name a few, a secure border, a ceasefire between India and Pakistan, continued pressure on both the Russians and the Ukrainians to end the war, and the return of American hostages from the clutches of Hamas. You've instituted a return to the office for states' employees and a return to a merit-based hiring system, ensuring the department can deliver for the American people. And of course, the Trump administration has sought to overhaul our federal spending, cutting much of the waste and abuse that wreak havoc on America's bottom line. Indeed, today up here, one of the main concentrations we have of the view is the fact that we're going upside down $1 trillion every 150 or so days. You've done all of these things while maintaining our strong presence abroad. This committee has worked hard in a bipartisan manner to approve 31 nominees for posts here and overseas to make sure you have the staff you need. And we continue to do so because you can't be everywhere at once, and the U.S. must have high-level representation on the world stage. This is important because we face threats from all across the globe. Actors from China to Russia, from North Korea to Iran have united in an authoritarian axis bent on weakening the United States. I believe China is America's greatest long-term competitor. But the previous administration treated China like an ally we disagreed with rather than an aggressor that takes advantage of America and our allies at every level. The Chinese government is fundamentally different from the United States. Where America promotes free markets and innovation, the CCP clamps down on businesses and steals American intellectual property. Where we believe that every person has God-given rights, the Chinese government commits genocide against Uyghurs and other minorities in China and harasses dissidents here in America. We want to work with you to ensure you have the tools you need to counter Chinese influence, including through the Development Finance Corporation and the Millennial Challenge Corporation. To truly counter China, we need to catalyze private sector growth worldwide where we can. As you know, China is not the only threat. Over the last decade, particularly in the last 3 years, Putin's aggression has created the largest security crisis in Europe since the Second World War. President Trump is working diligently to help end this conflict. We need to keep pushing our European allies to increase cooperation on security. Some have already boosted their defense spending to 5%, but many still need to take stronger steps to confront the threats they face from Russia. In the Middle East, even after the president's successful trip, tensions remain high. Hezbollah remains a disruptor to reform in Lebanon. Baghdad must work to disarm Iranian-backed militias. Israel remains under constant threat from Hamas and Iran's other proxies. And we all hope Syria's government lives up to the opportunity you and the president have given the country with sanctions relief. Meanwhile, The maximum pressure campaign this administration is reinstating on Iran is very promising. We stand a real chance at bringing greater stability to the Middle East. I know you and the President will continue this important work. Finally, I greatly appreciate President Trump's efforts to address long-standing issues with our foreign military sales process. Rebuilding our defense industrial base is critical to America's long-term national security, and FMS reform can play a vital role in that effort. However, I should note that many of the problems that plague the FMS process are the result of less than desirable policies and practices at the Department of Defense. It is in our interest to expand our defense production capacity and deliver needed capabilities to our allies. This committee has always worked closely with the administration on foreign military sales, and I know this will continue under your leadership. Secretary Rubio, as you and President Trump remake the State Department, I hope you'll consider this committee a partner and closely collaborate with us. As you bring the department into the 21st century through thoughtful reforms, I hope to finally see implementation of my Secure Embassies Construction Counterterrorism Act and Mission in a Box Act. These laws will help build new embassies easier, faster, and more cost-effectively, consequently freeing our personnel to conduct diplomacy abroad that advances American interests while better positioning the U.S. government to outcompete adversaries like China. Everyone who sits or has sat on this dais, including you, cares deeply about America's standing in the world. I look forward to hearing your vision for the ongoing State Department reorganization and how it will protect our national security interests. Thank you again for coming today. Again, a warm welcome, Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Rubio, welcome back. 4 months ago, you sat in that chair and you said that China is, quote, the most potent and dangerous near-peer adversary this nation has ever confronted. You called China an industrial competitor, an economic competitor, a geopolitical competitor, a scientific competitor. I believe you were right. And yet, this administration has eviscerated 6 decades of American foreign policy investments, undercutting our ability to compete with adversaries like China. And Beijing is not just sitting back. As Elon Musk took a chainsaw to USAID and you proposed cutting 83% of foreign assistance programs, China has promised increasing its diplomatic budget by 8.4%. As we move to reduce our diplomatic workforce and discuss closing U.S. embassies, China has more diplomatic missions than any other nation on earth. And as the U.S. canceled PEPFAR, our most successful program fighting HIV/AIDS, China has been happy to replace our global health efforts across Africa and Asia. As this administration distracts from serious national security issues with threats against Panama and Greenland, Xi Jinping has welcomed Brazil's president and other Latin American leaders pledging more than $9 billion in investments. And as the U.S. has shuttered Voice of America and Radio Free Asia and crippled the State Department's ability to counter foreign propaganda, China pours billions into propaganda, spreading lies and eroding trust in the U.S. As this administration imposes tariffs on our closest allies, China is courting them in Europe, in Asia, and in our own hemisphere. Beijing is making the case that they are, and the term they are using is frightening, they are a more reliable partner than the United States. And it's not just our allies. Xi has deepened ties with Putin, shielding the Russian economy from sanctions. Because of that, and because President Trump has given away our leverage, Putin doesn't feel pressured to agree to a ceasefire in Ukraine. And for all the administration's talk, for all Elon Musk's promises, according to reports, DOGE has not saved a dime. CBS News reports that the federal government has spent $200 billion more in its first 100 days than it did last year. And according to the Partnership for Public Service, DOGE's cuts might cost American taxpayers $135 billion this year. This is in addition to the costs to American families and businesses stemming from the president's trade war. I recently met with a New Hampshire company that provides ball bearings to the aerospace industry. They do a lot of their business with defense. Their lead time for steel has gone from 20 weeks to 2.5 years because of the tariffs on steel. We can't support our defense industry with a 2.5-year lead time on steel. According to the Yale Budget Lab, consumers face an overall tariff rate of 17.8%, which is the highest since 1934. That's $2,800 per household each year. And these tariffs amount to the largest tax increase during peacetime in U.S. history. 4 months ago, Mr. Secretary, you said we were going to be safer, stronger, and more prosperous. But whether it's President Trump's deals with the Sinaloa cartel to let cartel members into the United States, or watching masked agents abduct a Tufts college student, I don't feel safer. With Canadians canceling summer trips to New Hampshire and hurting our tourism industry, I don't feel more prosperous. And after traveling to Ukraine and visiting the graves of people who were massacred on the orders of a Russian president this administration has bent over backwards to please, I don't feel more secure. To your credit, Mr. Secretary, your trip and the statement from President Trump that he will be lifting sanctions on Syria was welcome news. And you've worked to restart some programs and grant waivers to others. But contrary to what we've heard, life-saving health and humanitarian aid is still not flowing in any meaningful way. My staff was just in Africa. We have photos of the empty shelves and closed-down clinics. We were promised a golden age for America, but instead our disease surveillance programs are down, our counterterrorism programs are in chaos, the ceasefire in Gaza has ended and fighting has begun again, and we have unilaterally disarmed against some of our most dangerous adversaries. You know, one of the things that I'll never forget in the past 4 months is my trip to Ukraine, where we stopped in Poland, which has been one of the most pro-American countries in the world. But because of the cuts and the stop work orders, we met with one civil society leader who was working with Ukrainian refugees. And he said to me, to the Codel, we always looked up to Americans. You are our trusted ally. My trust in America is broken. They were told to remove all the American flags with the halt on assistance to foreign assistance. Removing all the American flags is a sad commentary on the foreign assistance legacy for this administration. American flags coming down around the world. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Senator Shaheen. Secretary Rubio, there appears to be a modest disagreement in view of the condition today. It's your turn. Close the gap for us, please.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here on behalf of the National Archives, and in addition to...
We don't have time for you to list.
Okay, well, we'll focus on state today. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. You know, when I came here 4 months ago, I told you that what I wanted was a State Department that was at the heart and soul of American foreign policy, that it was the single biggest driver both of action but also of ideas, and we're well on our way to achieving that. And the way I'll talk about some of the individual things we've accomplished during that time, but first let me explain sort of some of the processes by which we seek to arrive at it. The first is a reorganization of the way the State Department functions. And we have sort of previewed that with the committee and many of the individual members. Obviously, we'll have to we've taken input and are taking input now through the notice process, and then we'll come back to you with a formal congressional notification once. But we are taking a lot of the input, both provided by individual members and your staff, but also from inside the building. But if I could simplify, the goal is this, and that is...
Yeah, all right, first... Carry on.
The goal is to drive power and action in our agency to the regional bureaus and to our embassies on everything we do. We want our foreign policy to be holistic. So, for example, we recognize that the set of factors, both in diplomacy and foreign aid in Guatemala or in Trinidad or in Jamaica, are going to look different than they may somewhere in Africa, somewhere in the Indo-Pacific region. And we want those decisions and the influence over those decisions to be made, to be driven to the regional bureaus. And so what we've done is we've taken a lot of the functional bureaus and functional processes and moved them under the purview of the regional bureaus and the career individuals that serve there, and ultimately down to the embassy. One of our first tests, Senator Shaheen, is going to be in Syria. We don't have an embassy in Syria. It's operating out of Turkey. But we need to help them. We want to help that government succeed because the alternative is full-scale civil war and chaos, which would, of course, destabilize the entire region. And we are going to allow our people on the ground, both our embassy personnel at the Damascus embassy located in Turkey, and for the short period of time, at least, or in the interim, our ambassador in Turkey, to work with local officials there to make determinations about what kind of aid they need. Is it humanitarian? Is it improving law enforcement or governance functions? We think it's going to be the first test of this new model, but I strongly believe that our decisions and the power to drive decisions and the decisions and the inputs that we're taking have to be driven in many cases from the bottom up, not from the top down, and focused on the fact that there is unique sets of factors in individual parts of the world that require different priorities and attention. And ultimately, foreign policy, mature foreign policy, requires a balancing of interests. That's just a fact. Okay? Our human rights agenda is going to look different in certain parts of the world than it will in others. That doesn't mean that we as a people have abandoned it. That means that in a world where you need to conduct real foreign policy in a mature and structured way, there are ways you're going to have to balance all these.
Actually, Senator Rubio, we're making progress. There's protesting in English now.
Oh, remember that? Yeah.
Remember last time.
So we have to understand, and that's why we think it's so important that our regional bureaus be at the core and at the heart of everything we do. And so we feel good about that part of it. By the same token, I think critical to this are some of the reforms we're trying to make to foreign aid. And I said when I appeared before this committee, everything we do has to make us stronger, safer, or more prosperous. So we've undertaken a review of our foreign aid. And the reality is that there are many of these programs, some are good programs. Some make all the sense in the world, and we wanted to pursue those programs. Some of these programs make all the sense in the world, but frankly, on the priority scale, perhaps other programs are more important. Others, frankly, made no sense at all. We can talk about some of those programs today. We funded things around the world that made absolutely no sense. I will say this, even with the reforms we put in place and what we're suggesting is changes to our foreign aid, we still will provide more foreign aid, more humanitarian support than the next 10 countries combined, than the entire OECD, and far more than China. China doesn't do humanitarian aid. China does predatory lending. That's what Belt and Road Initiative is. That's what all of their aid. They have zero record of doing humanitarian aid in the world. And frankly, they don't know how to do it. They have no interest in doing it. What they're very good at is going into some country, making you a loan, and then holding that debt over your head. And that's what they continue doing. By the way, you have to hire a Chinese company to do it. So I don't agree with this assessment that there's no evidence whatsoever that China has either the capacity or the will to replace the U.S. in humanitarian assistance, in food deliveries, or in developmental assistance for that matter. We provide development assistance. They provide debt traps. And that's a point over and over again around the world that we've made, and we've found receptive audiences to it. Now look, anytime you undertake reforms of this magnitude that needed to be made, you're going to have hiccups and you're also going to have controversy. But these reforms had to happen. At USAID, 12 cents of every dollar was reaching the recipient. That means that in order for us to get aid to somebody, we had to spend all this other money supporting this foreign aid industrial complex. We're going to find more efficient ways to deliver aid to people directly, and it's going to be directed by our regional bureaus, and it's going to sponsor programs that make a difference, and it's going to be part of a holistic approach to our foreign policy. And I look forward to engaging with this committee and the appropriators as well, and ensuring that we get to the right place on that. My last point I would make, and this is something I am very proud of. I believe, and I'm not besmirching anyone else, but I believe that the approach we have taken at the State Department, and frankly at USAID, but at State Department, to move forward reforms that involved intake from all of our partners, that required input from people within the building. Many of the reforms we've made were driven by people inside the building, many of whom have worked there for 20 or 30 years. And now we are engaged with Congress, both in the House and Senate, in a comment period where we're taking many of your comments and are making changes to our organizational proposals that we look forward to bringing back to you with an official congressional notification. And even after that, there'll be an opportunity to move forward. But the State Department had to change. I'm telling you, it was no longer at the center of American foreign policy. It had often been replaced by the National Security Council or by some other agency of government, when in fact we have these highly talented people, many of whom have served in multiple posts around the world and have a holistic view of how foreign policy needs to be conducted, that were being edged out. Because you know what? When I get a decision memo early on at the State Department and they would hand me these memos, there were 40 boxes on this piece of paper. That means 40 people had to check off, yes, okay, before it even got to me. That's ridiculous. That takes too long. That's why people said, don't use State Department. They take too long, and it's too cumbersome. And any one of those little boxes didn't get checked, the memo didn't move up the chain. That can't continue. We can't move at that pace in this world. Events happen quickly, and we have to be able to move at the pace of relevance. And so I hope to work with you in a productive way to make that possible. You're not going to like all the changes, but I want you to know what the intent of the changes are. It is not to dismantle American foreign policy, and it is not to withdraw us from the world. Because I just hit 18 countries in 18 weeks. That doesn't sound like much of a withdrawal. And I see some of these foreign ministers, including individuals from Ukraine, more than I've seen my own children. And I talk to them at least 3 times a week. We are engaged in the world, but we're going to be engaged in a world that makes sense and that's smart. And that isn't about saving money. It is about ensuring that we are delivering to our people what they deserve, a foreign policy that makes America stronger, safer, and more prosperous. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rubio. We're going to do a round of questions. We'll go 7 minutes since we have a secretary here. And I'm going to start. One of the things that you mentioned, and admittedly, what we're dealing with here is a large number of subjects. I want to focus on one that Senator Shaheen and I have worked together on, and that's the Syria matter. Thank you and the President for suspending or lifting the sanctions on Syria. I think the next step, and I think you agree with us that both Syria and Lebanon are opportunities for us. And we need to explore the opportunities with a careful eye on what's going on to make sure it stays on track. I think the next step, as far as I'm concerned, as far as moving Syria forward, is getting personnel on the ground there. And you and I talked about the possibility of opening the embassy. And I understand that this isn't a classified setting, but can you maybe describe for us the challenges of opening the embassy, why we haven't done it to this point, staying within the bounds of the
Yeah, well, it's entirely driven by security concerns. By the way, it's not the transitional authorities. We don't think they would harm us, but there are other elements on the ground in Syria that we have to be able to protect our people.
Important point.
And there are the ability, you don't just have to be able to get people in, you have to be able to get people out. We have all kinds of requirements that are there for a reason. If someone is hurt, do you have a medical evacuation plan? Can you secure a facility from an attack from an armed group, many of whom are still running loose in the country, unfortunately? It's one of the fundamental challenges the transitional authority is facing. On the broader point of Syria, I would say when Syria, if you look at the history of the region, when Syria is unstable, the region becomes unstable. And this has certainly been true after the Arab Spring led to the Assad rebellion against Assad, and that really destabilized the entire region. And then it turned Syria, frankly, into a playground for jihadist groups, including ISIS and others, that used it to operate and to destabilize their partners. So you have this change in December. And my view, which I've discussed with many of you individually, is the bad news is that the transitional authority figures they didn't pass their background check with the FBI. Okay, they've got a tough history and one that we understand. But on the flip side of it is, if we engage them, it may work out, it may not work out. If we did not engage them, it was guaranteed to not work out. In fact, it is our assessment that, frankly, the transitional authority, given the challenges they're facing, are maybe weeks, not many months, away from potential collapse and a full-scale civil war of epic proportions, basically the country splitting up. The good news is that there is a Syrian national identity. It is one of the places in the Middle East where Alawis and Druze and Christians and Sunni and Shia have lived and Kurds have lived alongside each other underneath the banner of a Syrian identity until it was broken by a butcher, Assad, who pitted them against each other. So they face a number of challenges. The first is they are dealing with deep internal distrust in that country because Assad deliberately pitted these groups against each other. He claimed to be the protector of the Alawis and the Christians and pitted them against the Druze or whoever else he wanted to, and the result is a deep level of distrust. The second is the displacement, upwards of 6, 7, 8 million Syrians living abroad. Very successful, by the way, in the countries they go to. But we need to figure out how we can enable the transitional authority to create an environment where they come back home, where they can come back to their homes, where they can help rebuild their economy. But what prompted the president to move quickly on sanctions? Because we had a plan. We engaged with a foreign minister at the UN here in New York. We gave him a visa to come into the country. We allowed their finance minister to come to World Bank meetings here in Washington, D.C. The next step was I was going to meet with a foreign minister, and some of you may have met with him already at Munich, but I was going to meet with him in Turkey at the NATO gathering. But the president had an opportunity to meet with al-Shara, and frankly, he made a bold decision. I'll do it. I'll meet with them under the Saudis and the Turks that encourage that. And the rationale and the reason is we need to, right now, the most important thing is that partnering nations, the nations in the region want to get aid in, want to start helping them, and they can't because they're afraid of our sanctions. So they don't. The lifting of the sanctions, its most immediate impact will be to allow neighboring countries to begin to assist the transitional authority to build governance mechanisms that allow them to actually establish a government, unify the armed forces under one banner and the like. But I want to be frank, that won't be enough. You know, with the Caesar Act, we can issue waivers, but these waivers, because of expirations on them, are not going to attract the kind of foreign investment. Ultimately, there's going to have to be something done congressionally or more comprehensively to ensure that if the right steps are taken, we can create an environment for private sector growth that begins to provide economic opportunity to the people of Syria. But one last point I would make is the outcome in Syria will have a deep impact on what happens inside of Lebanon, because Lebanon, too, has been hurt by a combination of clashes at the border, but also they've had to assume responsibility for some of these Syrian refugees.
We believe that, by the way.
So the combination, if you think about a region, let's say 2 years from now, where Syria and Lebanon are stable, that opens up incredible opportunities around the region for all kinds of peace and security and the end of conflicts and wars. Obviously, this is a big task. It's, you know, big picture thinking, but it's a historic opportunity and one that we are obligated to try to explore and see if we can make it work.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I think we're in full agreement with this, and it is a conundrum as far as the sanctions are concerned. We've got the 6 months, but as you say, the future, it's hard to predict the future since it hasn't happened yet, as Yogi Berra used to say, and there are real issues and risks in the future. We can take it a step at a time. You issued a visa to the foreign minister. Senator Shaheen and I met with the foreign minister in Munich. You issued him a visa to come to New York, which was important to meet with other heads of state. Do you have the ability to do that for the president also?
Sure. I mean, we could, and there may be an opportunity to do that come the General Assembly of the United Nations.
Yeah, probably will be, and I think that's important. Let me, you know, we do hear a lot of complaining and renting of garments over cuts here and there on our foreign assistance. But the number you laid out is absolutely stunning, that the United States contributes more to foreign aid than the next 10 countries put together. I mean, that's an absolutely stunning number. So I guess what you're telling us, before we feel too guilty about it, that we need to look around and compliment ourselves for what we are actually doing and have been doing for a long time. Fair statement?
Yeah, there's no doubt, and we want to do it in a smarter, more targeted way.
Lastly, let me give you a minute on PEPFAR. People talk a lot about the cutting in PEPFAR, and I think virtually everyone here supports PEPFAR. But you've done some things to it to make it better. Can you give us a short dissertation on that? Very short, please.
85% of PEPFAR is functional right now. I know there was some hiccups on the payment systems, not the waivers, the payment systems, because it goes to Treasury. Treasury has to push the money out. And there were some hiccups, which I acknowledged in conversations with many of you, but we have fixed that program and the money's flowing. So 85% of PEPFAR is functioning and is operating. There was reduction in about 15% of or individual pieces of the program, but PEPFAR today stands at 85% of functionality. And you know, when I hear these stories about, well, the money's, we're moving money out of the building every single day, 20 million one day, 35 million the other. I mean, money is moving out the door. It's going to somebody. Some of it is going to pay for work that was conducted in December, January, February before the freeze, so we are paying back invoices on some of them. But most of it, a lot of it, is going towards ongoing programmatic activities that are approved and that we've either through a waiver and or approval process are moving forward on.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I have a number of questions, but I first want to go back to what you had to say about China, because I agree that their efforts are predatory. But I think somebody may be missing what they are doing in response to our ceasing of foreign assistance in places. And Mr. Chairman, for the record, I'd like to submit this fact sheet. The PRC supporting international assistance as U.S. withdraws. It's dated April 29th. And just to give you a few examples, Earlier this month, General Michael Langley, who's the commander of U.S. Africa Command, I sit on the Armed Services Committee, and when we asked him about the end to specific USAID programs, he stated that the PRC is trying to replicate, in quotes, specific USAID programs in Africa that the Trump administration cut, including PEPFAR. And, I mean, there are several pages of these examples. Another one is in Cambodia. After the U.S. terminated $2 million in demining programming in Cambodia, the PRC immediately announced $4.4 million to expand its own demining programs. The PRC also recently stepped in to fund child literacy and nutrition programs previously supported by USAID. So we can pretend that China is not doing these things and picking up and promoting themselves as a reliable partner when the United States is not. But we have specific examples that show where this is happening. But I want to move to Ukraine because we heard the conversation that the president had with Vladimir Putin, the phone conversation where Putin didn't agree to any meaningful negotiation that would end this war in Ukraine. As President Trump has admitted, Vladimir Putin is taking him for a ride. Now, we have a bipartisan bill in the Senate that's led by Lindsey Graham. It has 80 sponsors. I understand that the House members are ready to take this up on a discharge petition if we pass it out of the Senate. How much longer until we rein Putin in? And are you prepared to support that sanctions bill that Graham and Blumenthal and 78 other members of the Senate support?
Well, let me answer your last question first, and that is about the bill. We obviously can't control what Congress does, and we've told the Russians this. Not now, 6-8 weeks ago. I believe, Senator Shaheen, you were involved in a conversation that made it clear to the Russians what would happen if there was no progress made. And that's been repeated multiple times. I would also make this point, and it's important. Every single sanction, not one sanction has been lifted on the Russians. Every single sanction that was in place under the previous administration remains in place. So this idea we've given up leverage, well, we have the same leverage today that we had under the previous administration.
Well, Mr. Secretary, I would argue that the leverage that we've given up is taking NATO membership off the table, taking away a commitment to continue to help the Ukrainians with intelligence sharing and with military equipment and arms that they need to help fight this war.
Well, that continues. There was a pause for 1 week. All of that was restarted.
That was intelligence sharing, though, but it doesn't cover the equipment and arms.
Oh, absolutely. That program has not been rescinded. They continue to receive armaments from the United States.
And we continue to fund what the Ukrainians need as the president, and are you prepared to pass another supplemental bill to support them?
Well, that's a different decision. That's a different question. That's not up for me to decide. The White House would have to make a determination about whether to come to Congress for a supplemental. But everything that's been approved and congressionally appropriated is ongoing. In fact, to the extent that the Ukrainians have asked for anything additional, what they've asked for is air defenses, Patriot units, which frankly we don't have. But we are working closely with our NATO allies. There are NATO allies that do have some batteries of Patriot missiles that they could provide or transfer over to the Ukrainians to defend, for example, the airspace of Kyiv and other places. And we've been encouraging in that front and working alongside our partners there to get deliveries of some of these systems. As you can imagine, none of these countries want to give up their Patriot systems either. But we can't make them fast enough, and part of the challenge we have in Ukraine is that munitions are being expended substantially faster than the ability of the broader West, not just us, but the West, to produce them. Now, that said, on the issue of Ukraine, here's what we can all agree on. There is no military solution to this crisis.
Right.
It will have to end in a negotiated settlement. And the fundamental challenge we have in Ukraine is this. Russia wants what they do not currently have and are not entitled to, and Ukraine wants what they cannot regain militarily. And that's been the crux of the challenge.
I don't disagree with that at one level, but on the other hand, what Vladimir Putin is doing now is playing for time, and he's playing this president like a fiddle. And the longer he plays it, the more opportunity he has to gain territory in Ukraine, and the harder it's going to be to get him to the table. What we need to do is to put pressure on Vladimir Putin in every way we can to ensure that we can get them to the negotiating table.
Well, I disagree with this playing with a fiddle analogy, because the truth of the matter is when Vladimir Putin woke up this morning, he had the same set of sanctions on him that he's always had since the beginning of this conflict, and Ukraine was still getting armaments and shipments from us and from our allies, and the European Union is about to impose additional sanctions, and the U.S. is looking for no Patriot batteries to be able to transfer from other NATO nations into Ukrainian hands. And what the president's trying to do is end a war. He's trying to end a bloody, costly war that neither side can win, and people are dying every single day. And so, but this notion that I don't, what has Putin gained throughout this? He hasn't gotten a single concession. He hasn't gotten a single sanction lifted.
And the more time he gets without additional pressure on Russia, the more incentive he's got to continue to gain territory and continue to play for time. But I want to just get to a final question because my time is running out, and that is, I recently wrote a letter to you about the issuance of executive orders on thousands of Afghan allies. These are people who fought alongside our military during the war in Afghanistan. They've been stranded in Qatar and Albania and Pakistan and Afghanistan. These are individuals who have been vetted already. They're ready to travel to the United States. And the question I have is this administration going to allow them to come to the United States as it promised? Because unless we're willing to keep our commitments to those people who were willing to fight and die alongside of us, then how can we ever ask people to do that again?
Yeah, a couple points. Some of those are I think the issues that's getting mixed up here is whether we are going to pay for them to fly to the United States once a visa is issued, or whether they have to find their own transportation to the U.S. So there's two separate topics: our payment to move people forward, but also the issuance of the visas. And when that is still going through an internal review as to who is going to be allowed in, there's been a review of the vetting process that's been used. Frankly, there have been some errors found in the previous vetting process that we're concerned about, and I'm separating out from that audience people who we have closely vetted because we've been working alongside them for many years with regards to their service alongside our intelligence forces or special operators on the ground from the broader. Remember, they're also bringing dependents with them. And so there were some concerns early on about freezing or slowing down this program until we could determine whether we were properly vetting people to come towards the United States. And that process is ongoing, and I think we'll have more concrete answers for you, which I know is not satisfactory at this moment, but we've obviously had a lot going on. But this is something that we've heard a lot from both our DoD partners and others in the intelligence community, and we're working to make progress on that.
I'm out of time, but just to clarify, on last week, Secretary Noem announced that temporary protected status, which I understand is not exactly the same, but for over 8,000 Afghans would end on July 12th. Many of those people are people, again, who fought and died alongside of our men and women in the military. And for us to send them back to sure death at the hands of the Taliban is just not what they were promised when they agreed to fight with us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Senator Ricketts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Rubio, welcome. The United States is at its most dangerous time in our history since World War II. And we know, we can see what Russia's done in Europe. We know the increasing aggression of Communist China, Iran, North Korea. I want to hit upon Iran real quickly here. As you know, this is a theocracy that's got brutal mullahs and corrupt military. They chant death to America, death to Israel. You've had 4 rounds of negotiations with them so far, and I think you framed it best when you said earlier this month they have to walk away from sponsoring terrorists, they have to walk away from helping Houthis, they have to walk away from building long-range missiles that have no purpose to exist other than having nuclear weapons, and they have to walk away from enrichment. That was your quote earlier. And that enrichment is particularly important, as you've stated, and Steve Witkoff reemphasized over the weekend, the ability to enrich at 3.67% for a civilian program. It only takes a few weeks to get to 90% for a military-grade weapon. Now, what I'd like you to just talk about real briefly is what are you thinking about when you say they've got to get rid of their nuclear program, they've got to have complete disarmament? Is it still the policy that they cannot be allowed to enrich at all in Iran?
Thank you. Well, obviously, these are ongoing, I hope to be ongoing negotiations, because the alternative would be far worse, in my view, but maybe necessary. But we hope that we can reach an agreement with Iran. So here's the baseline that I've described to everybody on it. If what Iran wants is a civil nuclear program, energy, the ability to develop nuclear energy, there's a model for that multiple countries around the world currently follow. And that allows them to build reactors and then bring in enriched material and use it to generate electricity. And that's a model that will be available to Iran potentially if they choose to take it. If, on the other hand, they want to retain enrichment capability. And I just described this because if anyone's watching this or in the future, this can get a little complex. All of you understand it, but for the general public, it's important when you get into the details of this. Once you know how to enrich at any level, all you need is time to be able to enrich at a higher level. And they've already proven the ability to enrich at a higher level. In fact, they have and are doing so now. In fact, their legislative branch passed a law requiring them to break JCPOA and enrich way beyond, almost well beyond 60%. So you're absolutely right. About 90% of the work of enrichment is getting to that 3.67 level. After that, the rest of it is just a matter of time, not to mention what the gap is from the 20% for medical isotopes, which is the other thing they insist upon. So the Iranian position is that they don't just want energy. They claim that enrichment is a matter of national pride. It is our view that they want enrichment as a deterrent. They believe that it makes them a threshold nuclear power and as a result becomes untouchable. And that is the crux of the situation we're facing right now. And there are other actors, and I won't go much deeper into that, but there are other nation states in the region that are also range from uncomfortable all the way to view as an existential threat the belief that Iran could ever be in a position of maintaining its enrichment capability in the long term that could quickly be weaponized. So that is the basis upon which we are negotiating with the Iranians. Our hope is that we can encourage them to show them a path towards prosperity and peace that allow them to develop their economy, that allow them, if they want, to have a civil nuclear energy program like other countries around the world have without enrichment. And it's our hope we can encourage them in that direction. The president has been very clear, and I won't elaborate any further, that they are never going to get a nuclear weapon. That is not going to happen. But I much prefer, and I would venture to guess all of you would much prefer, if we could reach an arrangement where they agree to this off-ramp, to this pathway towards prosperity and peace, as opposed to the road they have been on for the last 20 years. And it will not be easy. But that's the process we're engaged in now.
Right, thanks. So let's go to Communist China, because they're the greatest existential threat that we face as a nation. We both agreed last time you were before this committee that we need an all-of-government, not just an all-government, but we also need an all-of-society approach on how we face Communist China. This was illustrated in a recent table talk exercise that I did with Sarah Coons and others, and I'm talking about contingency where Beijing tries to do an energy quarantine on Taiwan to force them to capitulate. And obviously unlocking Americans' energy is one of the ways that we can help counter this with LNG and biofuels, some of our strongest tools to be able to help our allies and partners. Cutting red tape, unleashing American energy in the private sector, we're positioned to be an energy supplier here of choice. But we need the infrastructure in place, and that includes having a West Coast LNG terminal. Can you talk a little bit about what you're thinking about when it comes to this type of contingency with regard to an energy quarantine in Taiwan and how the administration would approach that?
Well, first of all, it would be devastating. The U.S., as you know, has agreements in place and assurances it's made on maintaining the status quo in that region, and those will remain viable without trying to be alarmist here. We know what those are, and we hope that never happens. But I think the broader issue that you touch upon, which I don't think is widely understood, again, members of the committee who follows this closely understand it, but more broadly, is the dangerous imbalance that has developed between China and the rest of the world on a number of fronts. The first is on access to rare earth minerals, which they have secured access rights all over the world on virtually every continent. They are predominant and or leading in their access. And it's one of the points of frustration that I have. You go to a country and you see how much money we've given in humanitarian aid, but when it comes to rare earth mineral rights and exploited, rights to natural resources, it's all on the Chinese side. So where's the connection between the aid we give to help countries survive and the fact that the Chinese are going in and somehow from these governments, bribery or otherwise, getting a hold of all these rare earth minerals and leases and contracts all over the place, not just in Africa, in Latin America, all over the place. The second is processing. They process all these rare earth elements. So we are literally, if they decide one day we're going to cut the world off, and they've threatened to do so to some extent with these trade negotiations, you won't be able to build an engine in this country. You won't be able to build a rocket or any of the things that we use in daily life. This is a very dangerous situation that's developed that has to be addressed as well. A lot of it will require domestic changes in our own country and building up our own domestic capabilities, for example, to refine rare earth minerals and to process, but also just to make things. Pharmaceuticals, another dangerous imbalance. We were, all this talk about them getting close to the Europeans, they're dumping on the European market. They're dumping electric cars. They're dumping all kinds of products because they're overproducing. They don't consume. So they dump all these products onto the European marketplace. But you know what the Europeans are very concerned about, the Italians in particular? They used to lead the world in pharmaceuticals, at least in the precursors and the key elements and the basic ingredients. Now the Chinese dominate 80-something% of that industry. They could cut off our medicine. So I think when you talk about energy, I could apply that to a host of critical industries in the 21st century. If we don't address that imbalance, which is what we're hoping to do with some of the trade proposals, but also domestic matters that the administration is taking on, we're going to be in real tough shape here very soon if we're not already.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. I see my time is up, but I look forward to continuing to talk with you about how we can create this all-of-society strategy to be able to fight back against Communist China, because you just laid out a lot of the things that we're at risk at, and we have to have a way to be able to push back on them so that they don't decide to try to take Taiwan by force or try to do an energy quarantine, which could lead to a war which would be devastating for everybody. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. A sobering analysis of where we are on the supply chain. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. Thank you, Secretary Rubio. Look forward to 2 sessions together today. This afternoon, you'll be in front of the Appropriations Subcommittee. And I think there's going to be some themes across both of these. First, I think we all agree that China poses our single greatest geopolitical threat and that we have no choice but to deter China across the board and to outcompete China. Senator Ricketts and I just traveled to the Philippines and Taiwan and saw directly the challenges that we face there and regionally. And you've recently had some significant successes, the DRC, Rwanda, peace transition, the avoidance of escalation in India and Pakistan, the opening towards Syria. But I also, frankly, think that there's been a real lack of coordination and some serious harm to our standing in the world with some of the countries that we have worked most closely with over decades. The DOGE-driven, abrupt, and largely illegal cancellation of billions of dollars of contracts for humanitarian relief and aid, and the disrespect and the dismissal of thousands of AID staff and our NGO partners stands in sharp contrast to the state reorganization process you just presented on in your following. You've submitted plans and proposals. We're having a conversation. You're going to send a congressional notification. We're going to have a hearing. That's the way that the reforming of USAID could have and should have happened. And so I just at the outset had to say, as someone who spent 15 years traveling the world, visiting both our partners and allies, looking at independent or semi-independent agencies like the MCC and the DFC and their role, and visiting NGO partners and the USAID, I reject the broad characterization of them by Elon Musk and DOGE as criminals who were wasting taxpayer money. You've heard across all of us support for PEPFAR, concern about humanitarian relief, and the vision that this is a key strategic asset for us. It's my hope that we'll work together to actually make real a more effective, focused, and sustainable foreign aid component to what STAID does, and sustaining organizations that we help build together, like the MCC, the DFC, and the Global Fragility Act. So let me turn to this for a moment. My colleague, Senator Shaheen, made reference to places in the world where the CCP and the PRC have stepped forward. I agree, they're never going to deliver humanitarian aid the way we used to and with the breadth, depth, and effectiveness that we have. But I also think they're taking advantage of the opening to say that we're not reliable, that our decades-long partnerships can't be sustained and extended, and to question our motivations. So I think we need to step out quickly to avoid creating a big hole in our credibility globally. Let me just start on a few questions with Ukraine. The previous administration worked closely with our partners and allies in Europe on sanctions to tighten them, to close loopholes, to extend designations. Are you continuing to do that?
Work with our allies?
To tighten the
Yeah,
sanctions.
so,
on Russia.
well, first of all, the Europeans have their own set of sanctions, and we've coordinated with them very closely. In fact, the president had a call with at least 6 leaders from Europe yesterday. I had meetings with what we call the Quint, that include Italy, France, the UK, the Germans, the French. So we are in constant contact with them on the work that they're doing. And they're proceeding along their own route. And in fact, in our conversations in the past with the Russians, we made clear to them that the Europeans and ultimately will have to be at the table because they have their own set of sanctions that they're imposing. So the answer to your question is we have worked very closely with them. The president understands fully the options he has available to him, some of which are represented in the bill before the Senate.
In the bill before the Senate that Senator Graham and others have led and that I co-sponsor, I think we have an opportunity to put more pressure on Russia and to push Putin to get to the table and to agree to a just and enduring peace. Do you support that sanctions bill? And do you think we should continue to arm Ukraine and to strengthen the sanctions against Ukraine in order to create the conditions for a real negotiation?
Yeah, look, it may come to that point. If, in fact, it is clear that the Russians are not interested in a peace deal and they just want to keep fighting a war, it may very well come to that point. The president has made that in the past. Our belief, the president's belief, is he believes that right now, if you start threatening sanctions, the Russians will stop talking. And there's value in us being able to talk to them and drive them to get to the table. We'll see. Look, they have to do this. No one's claiming that this is a guarantee.
President Zelensky reversed himself, showed up, was ready and willing to negotiate. And Putin, I think, my view, continues to play for time.
Well, so
I hope that we can work together to put more pressure on Putin to get to the table and to resolve this. The other thing that I see clearly, and I think many of my colleagues do, is that what happens in Ukraine sets the table for what happens in the Indo-Pacific. That there's an increasing coordination between the Russians, the Iranians, the DPRK, and the PRC. Do you see that as well, Mr. Secretary?
Well, we remind our European allies every day that were it not for China, Russia would not be able to sustain this. And they're fully aware of that. And obviously, we all understand the presence of the North Koreans and the Iranian role in this as well. But by the same token, I would say there's a flip side to that, and that is every minute we spend, every dollar we spend on this conflict in Europe is distracting both our focus and our resources away from a potential for a much more serious and much more cataclysmic confrontation in the Indo-Pacific. So the answer is yes, they are related, but they're related both ways. They're related on the one hand by the precedent that it could set, but they're also related by the fact that every minute that we spend on this conflict that cannot be won by military means, every resource that's expended into it is money and time that's not being spent on preventing a much more serious confrontation from a global perspective in the Indo-Pacific.
You made the point earlier that, in your view, we did not coordinate well enough between countries where we for decades had done humanitarian aid, disaster relief, public health work, and countries that ally with China in terms of resource mining and processing. One of the countries we visited was the Philippines. The Philippines is the most disaster-prone country on Earth. They have more typhoons, volcanoes, earthquakes than anywhere else, and they are a treaty ally of the United States. Yet we abruptly canceled a whole series of programs that provided disaster assistance, development assistance, and humanitarian aid. My hope is that we will work together to follow an appropriate and legal process to reform foreign aid and to align it with our values and priorities. I've long seen the MCC and the DFC as critical components in pushing back on what you correctly perceive as the PRC's extractive engagement with much of their region. What do you see as the future for organizations like the MCC and the DFC? And when we next speak this afternoon, I'll be pressing you on the America First Opportunity Fund and understanding how this nearly $3 billion Agile fund will fit into the picture for the future of aid.
Yeah, on DFC, we don't control those two entities. They're independent. They're both undergoing a review. DFC, I think, has the opportunity to potentially even expand. That's not a commitment, but I'm telling you there's talk about that. On Millennium Challenge, I think that I saw some reporting out there that it was being imploded. My understanding is the way it's being approached is that it's being reformed but not done away with. It was actually created as an alternative to the way we did aid with USAID. And so there's work happening on both of them. So my personal view on DFC is I think DFC has an opportunity to perhaps do more. And it's the sort of investment we want to make around the world and the way it's structured. And on Millennium Challenge, it's undergoing a review right now, but the review is designed to improve it, not to eliminate it.
Well, we should talk more directly about that. I'm concerned that what's happened in other agencies is happening there. The overwhelming majority of the headquarters staff being suspended or fired, and then compacts eliminated more quickly than it's being reformed. Same thing with global communications through USAGM, Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia. I'm concerned that we are conceding spaces to the PRC when we should be working together on a shared objective, which is to deter and compete successfully with the PRC. Thank you.
Senator Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, as you talked about visiting 18 countries and not being with your kids, I had a pain of guilt with you being here today, but thank you for making this a priority and being with us today. This might surprise some of my colleagues and maybe even you, but for the last several years, I've led a Republican delegation over to the Conference of the Parties, COP, and I believe that a Republican voice is really important at that table. I would point to issues, for instance, like nuclear. When I first started attending COP, nuclear was out of power, and we were shouting from the housetops that we had to have nuclear power, and I think that's shown the influence of a Republican voice over there. Your agency has done, and I applaud, a lot of reduction in cost cutting. Part of that's been the State Department's Office of Global Change, which would normally handle the COP arrangements. I'm wondering who we would work with, and if you've given any thought of who we can coordinate to make sure the U.S. and that we have a good presence over there in Brazil.
Yeah, so that'll be rolled into our Economics Bureau in the restructure. And I think on the energy front, it's actually going to be at the forefront of foreign policy for the next 100 years. One of the reasons why just AI alone and AI development alone is going to put a strain on the amount of energy that it's going to take to produce AI and AI-driven innovations will. We just don't produce enough global energy to meet it. And so it's going to provide two things: the strategic opportunities for nations that can deliver cost-efficient energy and in a sufficient volume. It's going to become an enormous opportunity for these countries to be leaders in the AI space. But the other is it's going to put a strain on everybody else because it's going to use up those energy resources. So we need to be at the table to have conversations about how, not just what our role in energy is, but how we help invest or partner with countries that have a supply of energy. So as an example, Paraguay has a hydroelectric plant right now, and they were in a long-term deal with Brazil where they sold them 50% of the energy being produced. That deal is now expired. They're trying to figure out what to do with the 50% of electricity generated by hydropower that is no longer going to be going to Brazil. And they can't put that in a tank and ship it overseas. So someone, if they're smart, is going to go down to Paraguay and open up an AI facility. Guyana has just made extraordinary discoveries on natural gas and oil. This is a country that's going to become incredibly rich very quickly and has an opportunity to both invest that wealth to develop their society, but also become a platform for other industries that could help strengthen the region.
For the sake of time, I just would love to work with the State Department on that, make sure we have a good presence for that message. I also believe the United States can carry a message that you don't have to give up affordability, you don't have to give up reliability, and we can also be clean. I think that's a really strong message for us. Foreign assistance has been talked about a lot today, and I'd like to just point out that there are a number of philanthropic entities in Utah. We have the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who are really ready to stand up and go to work. I know Catholic Charities, there's many like that. And just want to make sure you're factoring those into kind of your rebuild and restructure. I know there are a lot of people like that ready to jump in and be part of this.
Absolutely. And just to go back on foreign aid for a moment, we're going to be doing foreign aid. We're going to be doing humanitarian relief, disaster relief. We're going to be doing all the things we've done before, maybe not some of the same projects, but we're going to be doing all of it. The difference is it's going to be coordinated out of the umbrella of the State Department, and it's going to be part of a cohesive, coherent foreign policy. And it's going to be driven by our embassies and our regional bureaus. So in the case of the Philippines, which was brought up a moment ago, we're going to rely not just on the region, the bureau here in Washington, but in our embassy on the ground to help us every single year construct what aid needs to be delivered, be it humanitarian or disaster relief or the like, to that country. And that's been missing, that sort of cohesive approach to how we treat foreign aid as a tool in our broader toolbox, as opposed to its own toolbox altogether. We want to make it part of our broader toolbox on foreign policy.
Yeah, and I think my only footnote is, as we do that, let's keep in mind that many people are willing to participate and be part of this without a drag on the U.S. tax dollar that I think can complement the vision that you just laid. I've had the opportunity to work with you on the House side on some legislation and to some degree fill some of your big shoes here on Taiwan and Hong Kong. And I just wanted to touch on that briefly. I know Senator Ricketts brought up Taiwan with the recent implementation of more national security laws and the blockade-style drills around Taiwan. How can Congress better work with you and your department to support you and make sure we're doing everything that we can do?
I mean, unfortunately, with Taiwan, I think with Hong Kong, as we've seen, as its autonomous stand, I think our law now reflects that, is no longer real. It is basically an extension of, and I think one of the great examples of that is a company named Hutchison Ports, which is headquartered in Hong Kong. And they control two of the main facilities, the two main facilities on the Panama Canal. And everyone was saying, well, they're not a Chinese company. They're not Chinese. They're a private Hong Kong company. Well, when Hutchison Ports decided they were going to sell, all of a sudden the Chinese government's put all kinds of pressure on them, and it slowed down the deal. So how can it be if this company is an independent Hong Kong company, why do they care what the Chinese authorities think? Well, the reason is because they are under Chinese control and Chinese influence. And the fact they're headquartered in Hong Kong is no longer a protection from that. So I think it's important for us to understand Hong Kong cannot become a place where China can evade, be it sanctions or restrictions, by simply hiding behind some company who has an address there. It is sadly, tragically, and unfortunately, fully under the control, for national security perspectives, of authorities in Beijing.
And sadly, as part of that, has lost all of the values that were in Hong Kong before, of a free press, of free people, that went with that as well.
Yeah, those are incompatible with authoritarian rule.
Good. Thank you. Thank you for being here today, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Thank you, Senator Curtis. Senator Murphy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. Before I ask my questions, I just ask that after this hearing, you go back and reconsider a claim that you made in your opening statement. It would certainly shock Americans to hear that only 12% of our foreign aid reaches recipients, needy recipients on the ground, the people who need the help. That is not actually an accurate number. That is the amount of our aid that goes directly to local groups on the ground. But as you know, most of our aid runs through bigger international organizations like Save the Children. Those entities are getting somewhere around 85% of the aid we give them directly to recipients on the ground. And so I think what you've done to shutter USAID is illegal, but I also think it's bad policy, and I do think it's important for us to all be operating with the same set of facts. And the fact is not that only 12% of taxpayer dollars are ending up in the hands of the people who really need it on the ground. Mr. Secretary, I wanted to talk to you about the president's personal business interests. During his first term, he made the decision to not enter into any new business deals during his presidency, that Trump-affiliated businesses would not enter into any foreign business arrangements. And that made sense because obviously it can be confusing for foreign governments to know how to try to win favor with the U.S. government if they have one route, making concessions that are good for U.S. national security, and they also have another route, which is perhaps helping the president's business interests. The president obviously changed that policy, and in this administration, his business interests are announcing new agreements and new investments into those business interests by foreign governments. And I think it stands to reason that creates a real problem for foreign policy, and it creates a problem for foreign governments in which they don't exactly know what the best way is to try to get on good terms with the U.S. government and with the White House. Is it to do what's right for American national security, or might it also be to do a business deal with the President of the United States or the entities that he controls? Just to clarify, when the President's businesses are engaged in negotiations, for instance, with the UAE on their stablecoin business, there was this big investment announced recently. You are not part of those negotiations. Those are being done by the president's family or those representing the president's business.
Yeah, I'm not aware the president's involved in managing any business. He's other than the presidency of the United States. His family is allowed to make business deals. They continue to operate the enterprises that his family ran. I also don't accept the notion that these deals, that, for example, in Saudi Arabia or the UAE or Qatar, had anything to do with the president. For example, the Qatar bought $200 billion worth of airplanes from Boeing. The president's not as far as I know, not a shareholder, certainly doesn't own Boeing. So the overwhelming, if you look at the deals that were structured, they were involved in investments in the United States. That's the deals he signed, and or investments in, for example, the UAE or Saudi Arabia involving artificial intelligence.
UAE did announce a massive investment in World Liberty Financial, and World Liberty Financial is controlled by the president. And the president does actively engage in these businesses. He uses his social media to market the businesses that are being run by his family. I mean, just go on to his social media feed and you will see him marketing his meme coins. So that is the president of the United States. That is not his son's doing.
But that, just to be clear, that was not part of this. That was not an announcement as part of this trade visit that was conducted into the Middle East.
Well, whether or not it was made during the time the president was there are obviously business deals being done between Trump entities and these countries. Let me ask you about the one that is probably most confusing to this committee, which is the planned gift of a plane to either the United States government or the president. Is it your understanding that this luxury plane that Qatar has offered the president, and the president has announced he is willing to accept, is a gift to the United States government, or is it a gift ultimately to the president himself that he can use in his library?
Well, you'd have to talk to the Department of Defense, because this is a replacement or at least a temporary bridge plane for Air Force One, the new Air Force One, which is way off its delivery schedule. And so that would have to be with the Air Force. They operate Air Force One. My understanding of it basically has been from the very beginning that this is a plane that was identified after talking to Boeing about what other planes around the world would fit the bill that are out there that could be used now. They identified the ones the Qataris had as an opportunity for one, and as a result, or the UAE had as opportunity for one, and that's how that deal was.
And it's not your understanding that the plane ultimately will belong to the president or to the president's library after.
Well, I'm not involved at that level of it. I've never heard that before. What I've heard is that plane will replace Air Force One, which is an Air Force plane.
Let me ask you about the dinner that's happening this Thursday night. The president has offered access to him to the 200 top purchasers of his meme coin. Reports are that maybe about half or more of those individuals who will be meeting with him, many in a VIP reception, are foreigners. Do you have a list of those foreign individuals who will be meeting with the president?
I don't. I don't know anything about. I didn't even know there was a dinner on Thursday night, so I'm not sure what you're referring to.
So you don't know whether any of the foreign individuals who are going to be meeting with the president this Thursday night, for instance, are on our list of sanctioned individuals, or whether any of those individuals have connections to, let's say, terrorist organizations abroad?
Well, I think if they had terrorist links, the Department of Homeland Security probably would not have allowed them into the country. But I don't even know there is a dinner on Thursday. You're asking me about something I don't know about.
Well, but listen, this is a dinner that the president is having. It is likely going to involve some very significant foreign interests. You have to be pretty wealthy in order to be able to get inside this dinner. Isn't that a relevant question for the Secretary of State?
Yeah, I'm not the social
Which foreign
secretary,
interests are going to be speaking to the president? I mean, it's kind of naive to believe that they aren't going to be in that room talking about national security matters.
Well, I don't think that that's the case at all, because I would be aware if it was the case. The truth of the matter is I interact with government officials and others in governments of other countries. That's what I don't say. You're asking me about a dinner I don't know anything about. I can't answer you because I don't know anything about this dinner. It's the first I heard of it. Like I said, I don't keep the president's social schedule. It's not on my phone. It's not in my pocket. I don't even know. I can't comment on a dinner I know nothing about.
Yeah, I think that represents a real problem for this committee, because there is clearly a way around the State Department for foreign individuals of significant influence and wealth to be able to directly lobby the president of the United States.
But I don't think
your
that's
answer
fair.
is that you don't know this is happening.
Well, I don't know that there's
that
a dinner.
in and of itself is.
I don't know that there's a dinner, and I don't know what the guest list is. But I can tell you, I've run into the president of FIFA from the World Cup. He's here all the time. I see him. He's a private individual. It's not a government entity, and he's met with the president and is friendly with the president. He doesn't have to go through me to meet with the president. The president has relationships and friends and people he's known for a long time. Some of them are foreigners. That's not unusual.
Yeah,
but
these
you're
are
asking
people
me
he's
about a
known for
specific
long
dinner
time.
and
These are
implying
individuals
nefarious
who just
impact.
bought
I
their
don't. I
way
can't
into
comment
a
on a
meeting
on
with
a
the
dinner.
president. I think you should probably endeavor to get your hands on the list to make sure that there aren't individuals there who are perhaps contravening national security interests that the
Well, I don't think
Department
that's.
of
I don't
State
have any
is
concern about that.
prioritizing.
Ultimately, I don't have any concern that the president having dinner with someone is going to contravene the national security of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. In response to an earlier question, you sort of posed a question back. What is one thing that has happened during the Trump administration that has strengthened Vladimir Putin's hand in Ukraine, mentioning that the sanctions were still in place? I just would like to introduce for the record an article dated February 28 from NBC News titled, State Department Terminates U.S. Support of Ukraine Energy Grid Restoration.
That'll be entered in the record.
I was in Ukraine the day after the Palm Sunday bombing in Sumy and spoke to USAID staffers who had all been riffed. They're going to be laid off either the middle of the summer or early September. I'm aware that that's subject to litigation, but they talked about the fact that the grant cancellation canceled a grant that USAID had in place, hundreds of millions of dollars, that has been used repeatedly to restore the Ukrainian energy grid after attacks by Russians. I could give other examples. That is the one that is most present on my mind since I was just there. Mr. Secretary, I want to ask you about the program. It's the United States Refugee Assistance Program, and this is a program that state is the manager of, but together with other cabinet secretariats, DHS and HHS, state plays the lead management role, and it is how to manage the U.S. refugee assistance programs in tandem with contractors who help the United States on that. By an executive order on the first day of his presidency, President Trump paused all refugee programs and has canceled contracts to the agencies like the U.S. Catholic Church or Lutheran Refugee Services or HIAS or Church World Services who've been resettling refugees. Those programs are paused. There's litigation about it, but as far as I know, the United States is not, or the administration has not withdrawn the executive order. So there's essentially from this administration no refugee programs for anyone except. In early February, the president announced a special refugee program for Afrikaner farmers, justified A, by some concerns about South Africa and foreign policy, but B, a claim that these were persecuted individuals. So right now, the U.S. refugee program allows a special program for Afrikaner farmers, the first group of whom arrived at Dulles Airport in Virginia not long ago, while shutting off the refugee program for everyone else. Do you think Afrikaner farmers are the most persecuted group in the world?
I think those 49 people that came certainly felt they were persecuted, and they've passed every sort of check mark that had to be checked off in terms of meeting the requirements for that. They live in a country where farms are taken and land is taken on a racial basis.
Okay. Do you think they're more persecuted than Uyghurs or Rohingyas, or more persecuted than political dissidents in Cuba or Venezuela or Nicaragua, or more persecuted than those who would be threatened should they be returned to Afghanistan by violence by the Taliban?
Well, the problem we face there is the volume problem, okay? If you look at all the persecuted people of the world, it's millions of people. They can't all come here. And we had refugee programs that were acting as a magnet for people to come here.
Prioritize Afrikaner farmers?
Well, because it's a small subset, it's a new issue, and the president identified it as a problem and wanted to use it as an example. But that's different from having these refugee programs that were basically spending money to put people up in communities and accommodate them, and it was acting as a magnet. Millions of people entered this country illegally, and today the border is sealed.
Let me challenge you, and I'm just going to say for the public, if you want to understand about the, quote, persecution of Afrikaner farmers, go look at the composition of the South African government. Since July of 2024, there's a government of national unity, and the opposition party to the ANC, the Afrikaner Party, the Democracy Alliance, is part of the governing coalition. They joined the governing coalition a year ago, and the leader of that party was given the remit of Agriculture Minister, John Steenhuisen. He is the leader of the former Afrikaner Party, still widely representing Afrikaners. He is the Minister of Agriculture in South Africa right now. I assert that this claim that there's persecution of Afrikaner farmers is completely specious. Are you aware ever during the apartheid era in South Africa, did the United States establish a special program to allow South African blacks who were treated as second-class citizens in the apartheid program, a special program so they could claim refugee status in the United States?
No, because that was probably in 9th grade or 8th grade at the time.
Yeah, well, then I don't expect you to know. I'll just tell you, never has there been a special program for Africans to come in as refugees to the United States. We've allowed special programs for people being persecuted for their religion, Soviet-era Jews. We've allowed special programs for people fleeing from communism, Cuba, Vietnam, the Soviet Union. We've never allowed a special program to allow Africans into the United States in an expedited refugee status until now. Afrikaner farmers living in a nation governed by a government of national unity that includes the main Afrikaner Party. And actually, an even more right-wing Afrikaner Party is also included in the coalition government. Now, would you agree with me, Mr. Secretary, that if we're interpreting the statutory phrase, a well-justified fear of persecution, we should try to do that in an even-handed way?
I think we should try to do that in the interest of the national security of the United States.
So okay, I agree with you too. We should. Should we try to do it in an even-handed way? So, for example, should we say, if you're persecuted on the grounds of your religion, we'll let you in if you're a Christian, but not if you're a Muslim?
I think that the United States has a right to allow into this country and prioritize allowance of who they want to allow to come in.
But I'm going to ask you, what? Yeah. So a well-justified fear of persecution.
Yeah, they thought that their farms were being burned down and they would be killed. I think that's a pretty good justification for wanting to come. They're afraid for their lives.
And should it be applied in an even-handed way? That's an easy.
No, our foreign policy doesn't require even-handedness. It requires prioritizing the interest of the United States.
The phrase says you are entitled to entrance as a refugee if you demonstrate a well-justified fear of persecution.
No, you're not entitled.
So
you're
can
allowed.
you have a dividend to say that would be unacceptable?
Well, no,
that
I would say that the United States,
a very easy thing
the United States has a right to pick and choose who they allow into the United States.
Even based on the color of somebody's skin.
You're the one that's talking about the color of their skin, not me. These
are
people whose farms were being burned down and they were killed because of the color of their skin. Well, you've demonstrated enough because you think anyone should be allowed into this country for any reason because they met a certain criteria.
Who has said that?
We are going to prioritize people that come into our country on the basis of what's in the interest of this country. That's a small number of people that are coming.
But you said this weekend that
but
there
in other
would be more.
cases, it's harder to vet. In other cases, it's more difficult. And by the way, the United States admits people every year. 1 million people come to this country every year legally. 1 million
and
people
now
a year come to this
there
country
is
legally.
one group of people that have an easy pass into this country. For the first time, this administration has said Afrikaners get an easy pass and refugee programs for the remainder of the world are shut off. And you can't say to the American public that we should apply this statute in an even-handed way.
No, I think it should be applied in a way.
No,
you shouldn't be shocked. It should be applied in the national interest of the United States. Our immigration policy should be based on the national interest of the United States, period. End of story. If there is a subset of people that are easier to vet, who we have a better understanding of who they are and what they're going to do when they come here, they're going to receive preference, no doubt about it. There are a lot of sad stories around the world, millions and millions of people around the world. It's heartbreaking. We cannot assume millions and millions of people around the world. No country can. So you have to have a process of deciding who do you prioritize, who do you allow in. We do it all the time. We do it in our immigration system now under our current laws. Unfortunately, it's primarily based on family connection and not on what they're going to contribute to the society from a merit standpoint. That should be changed, but that'll require statutory changes. But the bottom line is this notion that somehow we have to accept anyone who wants to come to the United States is absurd. No country in the world has an immigration policy like that.
And no one is arguing that we should. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Senator Daines.
Secretary Rubio, it's great to see you here today. Very proud of what you're doing in your role. Grateful to call you a friend and to watch what you're doing now around the world with working on the president's agenda. Secretary Rubio, I want to talk about energy for a moment. Our allies in Europe are waking up to the security and economic threats posed by their reliance on Russian energy. Despite some progress, many of our European partners still are hesitant to diversify their energy portfolio, energy sources, and ensure they can literally keep the lights on. This recent nationwide power outage in Spain provided a timely reminder that intermittent sources of energy cannot replace reliable baseload power that comes from fossil fuels or other steady sources. So despite their acknowledgement of this threat, Europe is still making it very difficult for energy companies to do business on the continent. In fact, the European Commission promulgated regulations in the last year regarding ESG due diligence and methane emissions that will soon make it all but impossible due to these reporting requirements for major gas exporters to do business in Europe. Secretary Rubio, how can you work with our partners in Europe to build a more reasonable, broader, more diverse energy trade and regulatory framework that allows companies to deliver power that Europe so badly needs?
Well, obviously, when you talk about the European Union and these individual countries, they have a degree of sovereignty. They'll have to make these decisions. We can certainly, in our conversations with them, remind them of the vulnerability of their energy grid. It is, I think, everyone's consensus belief that one of the factors that went into Vladimir Putin's decision to invade Ukraine is his belief that Europe was so dependent on him for energy that they would do nothing about it if he did it. And that turned out to be the case. Now, you've seen some countries moving faster than others to diversify. For example, I believe on Saturday was the first delivery of U.S. LNG to Italy. They've opened up a terminal now to accept it. There are other countries that are looking. But obviously, these things take time. But I think the case in point, if in fact that's what led to the collapse of the grid, and there was, by the way, a collapse today in their telecom system as well in Spain, is a reminder of the vulnerability of energy, the vulnerability for purposes of just conducting 21st century commerce and economics, but also vulnerability potentially to being used as a geopolitical weapon against you. So I sense that among many of our allies in Europe, particularly those on the eastern flank, there is a growing, and I would say not just awareness, but a growing fear of how vulnerable they are on energy, both to foreign actors and because of the strains that are going to be placed by AI and other new technologies on our energy grid in the years to come.
Secretary Rubio, I want to shift gears for a moment and come back to a part of the world that doesn't get a lot of attention, but very strategically important, that's Central Asia. Think about Central Asia, the 5 countries, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan. When they wake up in the morning, they look north, they see Russia. They look to the east, they see China. They look south to Afghanistan. They look south and west to Iran. There is great potential that I don't believe is being utilized. An example of that is the lack of a trans-Caspian pipeline. You've got these 5 Central Asian countries, the Caspian Sea. 20 miles is all that's needed right now for an interconnector to basically connect Turkmenistan into Azerbaijan and then into the network pipe, the gas line pipeline, certainly throughout Europe. It's just 20 miles for that interconnector. Turkmenistan has the 5th largest reserves of natural gas in the world. Huge potential, and obviously with their neighbors of China and Russia and Iran, getting that gas out is a challenge, but there's a path forward through the Caspian Sea. Mr. Secretary, do you believe that completing that 20-mile Caspian interconnector would be in the best interest of the United States and our allies?
I think the answer is yes. That's what you're saying. I mean, it sounds to me that way from what you've described. I can't say I'm an expert on those 20 miles, but I could certainly see from your argument, the way you put it forward, that it makes all the sense in the world. And it reminds me, once again, of why we want so much of our foreign policy to be driven at the regional and embassy level. Those are exactly the kinds of opportunities that in a different context, where how we were conducting energy policy would be lost. Those are exactly the kind of opportunities that would be driven from the bottom up. Ideally, we would have embassies, and we would have individuals in the bureaus that would identify these operations, and within that bureau be able to operationalize it by conducting energy diplomacy. Potentially, are there American companies or allied companies? I apologize. Are there American companies or allied companies that can contribute to that effort? that can help us to fill that gap and provide the contracting work needed.
Yeah, you know, and Secretary, what's fascinating is when you engage those countries, and I was the first U.S. Senator to be in Turkmenistan and Tajikistan in 13 years when I went over there last November.
As you can see, energy is a very emotional thing to me.
It is, Mark. I get choked up, too, thinking about it. But they talk about multi-vector diplomacy over there because you've got the Russians and the Chinese who are actively engaged right now, and I think there's a bit of a vacuum as relates to the United States, and we can help fill that vacuum because they want to work with us. They were thrilled with this election in November. I spoke with every one of the Central Asian presidents, each one of them, one-on-one meetings. They were very pleased to see the outcome in November, and now they're ready to move forward here with a close relation to the United States. And I think Azerbaijan and that interconnector could be, as they say, that is the cork on the wine bottle of Central Asia that could actually unleash some of this energy and move it towards allies and friends of the United States instead of being dependent on Russia and China. By the way, they've been a very valuable ally in the global war on terror as well. There's a counterterrorism mission here as well. I would just throw out in terms of your radar, because you've got a lot on your plate right now, Mr. Secretary, but I think we could encourage the modernization of trade relations in that part of the world where there's, frankly, a lot of great power competition going on. But anyway, Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you up here. Godspeed, and thanks for all you're doing for our country.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Merkley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and greetings, Secretary Rubio. And it was a pleasure to work with you when you were in your Senate capacity on a number of human rights issues related to China, Taiwan, Tibet, Hong Kong, and certainly the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which I think is a standard and a strategy I hope will spread to other countries to reject goods made by slave labor in China. Today, however, I want to wrestle a bit with another what I consider to be a humanitarian tragedy, the conditions in Gaza. I very much supported Israel going after Hamas following October 7th, but we are now well over a year and a half into this, and there's a new phase of events, which I'll try to summarize. 6 months ago, Finance Minister Smotrich said Israel should thin the population through voluntary migration. He also used the term encouraged migration. These terms are considered a euphemism for forced displacement. And the strategies of forced migration are food denial, the demolition of homes so that there's no place to return to, and driving people from one area in the Gaza Strip south to the southern side. Then there is a new plan called Operation Gideon's Chariot, mass call-up of troops in Israel. And Netanyahu said a few days ago, he said, we're going to take over all the areas of the Gaza Strip. By the way, on that forced displacement or the demolition of homes, I want to put up a chart to accentuate the point. This is satellite images done by the New York Times that show before the war, the detailed homes, mass damage before the ceasefire, and then since the ceasefire, absolutely the entire neighborhood turned to rubble. There's just basically nothing left that is habitable. So I wanted to just make the point that it's not some theory about the strategy. The strategy is being implemented and implemented very aggressively and effectively. But let me return to the issue of food denial. The Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs estimated that in February, 2,000 children were admitted for treatment of acute malnutrition. I was thinking about the strips that are used. They're called MUAC strips, mid-upper arm circumference. It's basically a measure of the bicep. And I saw them I went to areas that were under starvation in Africa, and I saw these being used, and you'd see a child, and you would think this child is just maybe 2 years old, and they'd be 5 years old, and their arms as thin as toothpicks. And I was struck when a UN health representative returned and said, and I quote, "I've seen them in the wards," referring to the hospital wards, "a child of 5 years old, and I thought he was 2 and a half. So Ulcha said 2,000 children, acute malnutrition. That's a nice way of saying we're starving. In March, there were 36 children admitted for acute malnutrition. The denial of food began, the blockade began March 2nd, so the numbers are undoubtedly up much higher in April and now into May. The World Health Organization reported a couple days ago that 57 children had died from the effects of malnutrition. That blockade shows signs of being changed. Netanyahu has made some public comments. He said, "We will not stand by." We cannot reach a point of starvation for practical and diplomatic reasons. He went on to say that mass starvation is a red line that could cost Israel support from the U.S. He didn't say it was a humanitarian problem, but support from the U.S. And yesterday, 5 trucks went in, and there's a plan to get up to 100 trucks. But 5 trucks is 1% of the amount needed for daily food supplements, and 100 trucks is still only 20% in an area that's already extremely hungry. This has led Canada, France, and Britain to say we cannot stand by while the Netanyahu government pursues these egregious actions. The level of human suffering is intolerable. So I guess my question here is the U.S. is a very close ally to Israel, both in military, security support, certainly in economic support. Is the administration conveying to the Netanyahu government that encouraging migration through food denial is an unacceptable strategy?
Well, let me say I won't discuss, obviously, for many different reasons, what we share with our partners and allies. But I will walk you through some of the steps that you've rightly outlined, what has happened over the last...
It's not too long a speech, because I'm really trying to get where our administration is standing.
Well, I'm still trying to get the center out of me, so I still talk longer than I should, so I'll be more brief.
I'm going to have to reclaim some time, but go ahead, try to keep it very...
Well, you want me to answer?
I do want you to answer, but hopefully answering the question is pretty simple. Does the U.S. consider this an acceptable strategy of encouraging migration?
Well, I would say that we were pleased and to see that aid is starting to flow in again. I understand your point that it's not in sufficient amounts, but we were pleased to see that decision was made. I understand another 100 trucks are behind that and maybe more in the next few days. I'll also tell you that I met in Rome 3 days ago with the World Food Program to walk through some of the ideas and plans they had for distribution on the ground. And ultimately the answer here is for this to end, hopefully with the elimination of Hamas, because the people of Gaza deserve a more prosperous, peaceful future, which they'll never have as long as Hamas exists.
Well, thank you. That was brief and well done. Thank you. So then the second part of this is the systematic destruction of remaining homes as a way to make it impossible for people to stay in Gaza. Does the U.S. discourage that? Is it discouraging the Netanyahu government from continuing that strategy?
Well, we don't view that that's their strategy. We understand that they are targeting elements of Hamas, is what they have claimed and said to us and to the world, that they believe that they need to root out the remaining elements of Hamas, who, by the way, have been an impediment to multiple ceasefires that I know have been negotiated and even agreed upon by Hamas external and then vetoed by Hamas internal.
Is the U.S., it sounds like then, therefore, we're not concerned about that, or you characterize it differently. There has been reports of the administration working behind the scenes to develop a plan to help deport Gazans to Libya. Have you been involved in any discussions related to deporting people from Gaza, Palestinians in Gaza, to Libya?
No, there's no deportation. What we have talked to some nations about is if someone voluntarily and willingly says, I want to go somewhere else for some period of time because I'm sick, because my children need to go to school or what have you, are there countries in the region willing to accept them for some period of time? But those will be voluntary decisions by individuals.
Well, if they're voluntary decisions because there is no clean water, there is no food, and bombing is all around you, is that really a voluntary decision?
Well, ultimately, that's the point, right? And that is you don't want people trapped there. They may want to come back. They may want to live there in the future, but right now they can't. And if there's some nation willing to accept them in the interim period, yes, we've asked countries preliminarily whether they would be open to accepting people, not as a permanent situation, but as a bridge towards reconstruction.
Does that include Libya?
I'm not aware of Libya.
Thank you. I will just summarize since my time is up. I think the U.S. has a moral responsibility to fiercely convey to the Netanyahu government that using food as an instrument of war is unacceptable. It's a violation of international humanitarian law. It's mass punishment. We have now children who are dying, and while Netanyahu has said he doesn't want to see mass starvation, he's drawing the line at mass starvation, but we're seeing real starvation right now, and I think we owe it to our connection and our close relationship to Israel to powerfully convey the importance of not just 5 trucks a day like yesterday or 100 trucks a day, but enough food to end the starvation. Is that a policy you can get behind?
To ultimately rebuild and provide people a future in Gaza?
To get behind enough trucks to end the starvation.
Yeah, we've made that point. Look, I think ultimately, I don't think you would have seen the events of the last couple of days without our engagement, the engagement of others. Israel remains a strong ally. We're supportive. We understand why, for their security, Hamas cannot exist. We are also very happy to see that they have allowed aid to begin to flow, and we hope that that will continue.
Concluding comment, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your tolerance. It's an important topic. Netanyahu did say he was responding to remarks and pressure from American politicians. I assume that's the administration saying that we, America, cannot accept mass starvation. But I would encourage you to push not for 5 or 100 trucks, but enough food to end the fact that children are starving and adults are starving, innocents are starving. Our close relationship, we need to end it.
Senator McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Shaheen, and Secretary Rubio. Good to see you. It's always great to have you here. Let me start with Iran. I'm deeply concerned, as I know you are, about Iran's nuclear ambitions, and I agree wholeheartedly with President Trump's view that there must be complete dismantlement of Tehran's nuclear enrichment capabilities. A key flaw, as you know, in the JCPOA was its failure to address Iran's support for terrorist proxies. And we've seen the horrific results of that. What assurances is the administration seeking from Iran on its support for terrorist proxies as part of the negotiations?
Well, interestingly enough, the negotiations initially have been focused entirely at this point, although obviously we're aware of their sponsorship of terrorism in the region, including the Houthis and Hezbollah and other groups such as this, the militias in Iraq, and their efforts to get back into Syria. Right now, the focus at this point of this has been their enrichment capability, and they're insistent on enrichment capability. Ultimately, I would say that if in fact we have sanctions that are related, things such as sanctions that are related to the sponsorship of terrorism and their violation of weapons conventions and the like, their long-range munitions, those sanctions will remain. If those aren't part of the deal, then the sanctions will remain as a result of that. But initially, I could say that the focus of the conversations over the last few weeks with Mr. Witkoff and the Iranians has been on this enrichment matter, which is by far the sort of the core and most critical matter. As you know, the Iranian position is that they have a right to enrich as a matter of national pride, and our view has consistently been that they can have a civil nuclear program without an enrichment capability, and that an enrichment capability, in fact, would be weaponized at some point in the future, or could be weaponized, and that's a threat that cannot be accepted.
Good, thank you. On Syria, I know that many of us are eager to work with you on implementing the President's plan to lift sanctions and protect key U.S. priorities. What assurances is the administration seeking in your discussions with interim authorities on counterterrorism priorities, including the fight against ISIS, during the process of lifting the sanctions?
Well, ISIS hates the transitional authority, and they hate al-Shara, and they hate everybody in his government, and I think pose a grave risk to them. So I don't think the issue with them right now is a matter of willingness or a lack of willingness. It's a lack of capability. So there will have to continue to be a role to play in the interim period, both by the United States and our allies and the Kurds and others, in ensuring that ISIS cannot metastasize and grow. One of the most threatening things that we would face, for example, is an ISIS prison break, where suddenly you have a bunch of ISIS fighters loose on the streets and undermining the government. But I do think that part of this dynamic and why we're in a race against time is that every day that goes by that the transitional authority does not have control of the government and or of daily life in some extent, or able to provide basic government services, is a day that ISIS has the ability to reconstitute itself and grow as a threat, both to the transitional authority but ultimately to the broader region. So I don't sense from them a lack of commitment and desire to do something about it. I think, frankly, it's at this moment a capacity issue. They simply, at this moment, do not have the capacity to assume the anti-ISIS effort by themselves. But we hope that with a fully integrated Syrian military that includes the Kurds and everybody else, if you can have no other armed groups in the country except those under the authority of the Syrian government, then I think you begin to make progress. But we're not there yet. That's going to take some time to build, and we look forward to helping as much as we can and as much as those they want.
Along those same lines, as you know, Turkey has significant interest in Syria and has been, I think, an important part of the steps that have recently taken place. But our allies in Israel and Jordan are concerned about Ankara's ambitions there, especially in southern Syria. How are you managing those tensions and allied concerns as it relates to Turkey's role in Syria?
Well, in the case of Israel, we've had conversations with them about this, what we view as an opportunity for Israel. If, in fact, Syria is stable and has in it a government that has no interest, as they have said, in fighting a war with, and the authorities have said it. Now, obviously, you have to prove it, but they have said this is a nationalist project. They are seeking to build a nation. They're not viewing themselves as a launch pad for revolution. They're not viewing themselves as a launch pad for attacks against Israel. So we think this is an extraordinary thing. If, in fact, you have in Syria a stable government that encompasses all the elements of their society and has no interest whatsoever in fighting wars with Israel over borders or anything else, I think that's an extraordinary achievement for Israel's security. Obviously, they're concerned about the Turkish presence, and we've done some things to deconflict on that front. And I think one of the key points is going to be foreign military basing inside of Syria. And that is, at some point, the Transitional Authority will have to make a decision about whether they're going to allow foreign military basing. That includes Russians, but potentially the Turks have wanted that as well, especially in the central part of the country. Now, the Turks do have a presence in the north, as you know, and one of the things that our Central Command was very influential in doing is helping the Transitional Authority enter a preliminary agreement with Kurdish authorities in the north, which ultimately should lead to the Kurds becoming part of the broader Syrian government and broader security forces. And by the way, the Jordanians, despite concerns they may have been very helpful and very encouraging in our outreach to the Transitional Authority.
Very good. Thank you. I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Schatz.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member. Secretary, thanks for being here, and I appreciate our ongoing dialogue, even if we're in some disagreement about a number of things. I want to ask you, I'm going to try to work the senator out of you here. A bunch of yes or no questions. They are not trick questions. Are you still the acting USAID administrator?
Yes.
Do you control hiring and firing at USAID?
Yes. Well, I delegate the authority to an administrator, but obviously, yes.
And you control hiring and firing at state?
Again, we obviously rely on our bureaus that do. I mean, it depends what you're. I mean, that's a highly technical question. I don't hire the line officers in every embassy in this, but I mean, technically,
you're ultimately in charge.
Yes.
Okay. Did you personally review all the programs terminated during the foreign assistance review and personally make termination decisions?
Yes.
Do you have the authority to direct any state or USAID staff to brief Congress?
Yes.
Can you have Mr. Lewin or you come back to Congress and talk about USAID in the context of the coming end of the federal fiscal year and SFOPs and appropriations?
That's already planned to do that, not just him, but others, because we'll have to update you on that, on our reorg organization, whatever OMB decides to do with money. So there's a host of things for us to all talk about.
So I just want to illustrate, whenever I talk with you, I feel pretty encouraged, and then stuff doesn't happen. I wrote 8 unanswered letters, and I request to enter those into the record without objection. And my staff has sent 200 unanswered questions, 200 unanswered questions about this much paper. Consultation is not a courtesy. It is required by law, and we have now 200, and these are perfunctory. What are you up to? What does this mean? This is the kind of normal pace of operations. Radio silence. Other than you're very responsive, your department and USAID has not been very responsive. The Foreign Affairs Reform and Restructuring Act, the Empowerment Control Act, the Anti-Deficiency Act, the Foreign Assistance Act, and the annual appropriations bills for state and foreign operations have been violated in multiple ways. On March 12th, you wrote, "We plan to engage Congress as required both by law and reality before we start drafting a plan to bring USAID over under state." That did not happen. As you know, we have a pledge. We owe the Global Fund $1.3 billion. I spoke with the head of the Global Fund in response to my repeated requests and multiple other people's repeated requests. You told me that those funds were going to be released. It has not happened. I'd just like you to respond to that. And again, I like you, I like our working relationship, but what is happening is we have a good conversation, and then I don't know, it seems to be getting sandbagged underneath you in this vast bureaucracy.
Yeah, well, that's part of the reason why we want to reorganize, is to have less vast bureaucracy, but I wouldn't blame that on this. The first couple points, we believe and continue to believe that we have complied with the law on every step of the way, including through advising Congress of our roles, and even now with the reorganization. We have not issued a congressional notification yet. We issued a preliminary. We have taken input from members. I actually personally signed a letter that I think should have been delivered to you. I was overseas. I don't know if it was Monday or Sunday or Saturday, but it was in response to your latest letter.
Yeah.
So I hope you did get that. And obviously we'll continue to engage with you on all of this as well.
So the practical effect here, right, because everyone can agree that, well, I don't know if everyone can agree, but it seems to me that most of us agree that there is virtue in reforming any big institution, and that aligning USAID's operations with the State Department and the President's and the Secretary's foreign policy objectives is beneficial. The question is, can we do this lawfully and in a way that doesn't damage our international reputation? Mothers who have fled Boko Haram in Nigeria are watching their babies starve. Children in South Sudan are dying of cholera. Families are dying because they have been cut off from their HIV medications. There are about 103 deaths an hour. And so we can talk about the reorganization of the State Department, but this becomes quickly not an abstraction, not a normal public policy tug and pull, because the way that this has been done, set aside our disagreement about whether it's been done lawfully, it's been done in a just catastrophic fashion. And so on some level, that's water under the bridge. But what I want from you is a commitment to try to get an appropriations bill that is done on a bipartisan basis that reconstitutes the foreign aid enterprise. I think we can do fewer things. I think we can be more narrow in our focus. But you are pushing on an open door, and instead of pushing on that open door, you are lighting the room on fire. Maybe that was not your intent. And I think we have two objectives right now: minimize suffering and reputational damage, that's one line of effort. And the other is, how do we get back to the regular order where we can do a bill together? And I'd like your thoughts in the remaining minute and a half.
Yeah, well, first of all, that is the intent here, right, is to rebuild the foreign aid enterprise under the State Department. By the way, it's something multiple secretaries of states before me have wanted to do, because we want foreign aid to be a part of our diplomacy toolbox and our way we engage the world, not its own separate entity, but all of it coordinated one with the other. So that's our hope on the reorg, and that's what we're trying to endeavor towards. I also don't think it's fair, by the way, you highlighted a couple points. Like in South Sudan, there's distribution problems there. It's not just a program. PEPFAR is 85% operative right now. So you touched about HIV medication.
Secretary, you are required to spend 100% of the money, not 85% of the money.
But 15% of that is funding of programs that we've canceled. We're going to cancel those programs. We've rescinded because they don't reach the purpose of those are elements of individual programs, for example, that were not meeting the mandate of the program. They were not being delivered. We just the other day at the embassy level in Namibia identified fraud, where millions and millions of dollars of U.S. aid was found on the store shelves being resold into the marketplace. It was our ambassador who discovered it. We tried to work with local authorities to fix it, and it was not fixed. And he was weeping at the conference while announcing this decision because he'd hated to do it. And some of the places you highlight, it's important to remember, even if the money is distributed, sometimes it cannot be brought out. The aid does not reach people because armed elements in Sudan, in South Sudan, are impeding aid from reaching their intended recipients.
It's a very complicated world in terms of the delivery of aid. The one point I'd like to
Senator, you're out of time?
With your indulgence,
yeah.
30 more seconds. And you and Senator Murphy had an exchange about this. It is just not true that only 12% of the aid reaches recipients. The way you get to 12% is it's 12% local NGOs. So that is excluding CARE, that is excluding the World Food Program, that is excluding Catholic Relief Services. And so if you're going to count that as like overhead or inefficiency, Secretary Rubio, you and I have honest disagreements, but that number has been given to you and is not an accurate assessment of the extent to which aid reaches the people who need it. And I will just say, if there's an enterprise to reduce overhead, count me in, but it is not 88% overhead. That's not what's happening. Thank you.
Well, that number, just to clarify, was actually Samantha Power's number. And she regretted that one of the things she was unable to do at USAID is improve upon that number.
Thank you. Senator Barrasso.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in just 5 months, Secretary Rubio, and it's wonderful to have you back here in the committee. In just 5 months since you've been there, along with President Trump, I just want to take a moment to highlight the incredible work that this administration has accomplished with your leadership, and clearly President Trump's, restored U.S. leadership across the globe, unleashed American energy, secured our southern border, reduced illegal immigration by 95%, reimposed maximal deterrence on Iran, pushed back on Chinese aggression, created new deals for U.S. companies, secured the release of hostages and unjustly detained Americans. I really appreciate the strong leadership. And according to Monday, Mr. Secretary, and you see the wonderful picture of you in today's Washington Post, you and your bride Jeanette meeting with the Pope. If you take a look up here, Marco, you're going to see this great picture of you. And yeah. Want to comment on that at all? I've done all these things, and you got to meet the Pope. A new Pope, an American.
Well, I told people yesterday I started the morning meeting with the Pope, and I ended the evening at an event, a Kennedy Center event at the White House with the U.S. President, and they were both Americans.
Amazing times. I want to talk about Iran, if we could. So in the first 100 days, the maximum pressure campaign against Iran came into full force once again. The administration sanctioned 72 entities, 14 individuals, 74 vessels, as well as 18 additional entities, including 2 Chinese-based oil terminals, 13 vessels. I think the maximum pressure campaign is working. We're already seeing a reduction in Iran's ability to fund destabilizing operations across the region. How does the administration plan to maintain this momentum and then continue with the talks that are going on?
Well, I think it's clear for the Iranians. I mean, we're going to continue with sanctions until there's a deal otherwise. And by the way, there's also another set of sanctions out there that involve things like the sponsorship of terrorism and things of that they're doing. But when it comes to the nuclear program, until there's a deal, there's going to be sanctions. That's just the way it works. And so that's the president has issued an executive order for maximum pressure, and that's being executed on every single day. None of these are being slowed down while we're engaged in these talks. Ultimately, if we are able to reach a deal, then obviously that could be a part of it, but we're not at that stage yet. So, look, we hope that there can be something done. These will not be easy. And by the way, one additional note on it, there's a separate set of sanctions out there, which are the snapback provisions that the E3 in Europe have. That's on another clock, completely different from ours. And I want to be clear about that. What they decide to do with their sanctions. Now, maybe we'll do a deal with Iran and they'll be satisfied with it and not impose their sanctions. But I met with the E3 again. What day is it today? Tuesday? I met with them maybe 4 days ago in Turkey. And they are moving forward on their process, independent from ours, that could impose additional sanctions as early as July, August, September, October, November, September, October of this year.
I want to move to one of Iran's in the neighborhood neighbors with Syria. And President Trump met with the new Syrian president. He's urged the leader to deport foreign terrorists from Syria, help the U.S. counter ISIS. I want to just talk about ISIS, if I can, the concern for the resurgence of ISIS. It's been a significant concern. About 2,500 active ISIS fighters operating in Syria and in Iraq. Estimated 10,000 ISIS fighters in prisons in Syria. And what's your assessment of the threat posed in ISIS? And I know we have a presence. I was visiting our Wyoming troops who are in eastern Syria, and I want to know how that's helped to address the threats.
Yeah, so there's 2 major threats facing the Transitional Authority in Syria. The first is a resurgence of ISIS, many of them foreign fighters, most of them foreign fighters, and that's a very significant element because any space that's ungoverned, if there are parts of the country where the Transitional Authority does not control it, it creates an ungoverned space that ISIS can come in. So that's the first threat. The other is Iran. Iran has not given up its efforts to gin up former Assad officials and others to get behind certain armed groups on the ground and stir up trouble as well in the country. So these are both threats. They're different, but they're related, and they pose 2 of the most serious threats to the Transitional Authority's efforts to create a nation state in in Syria that does not threaten Israel, does not threaten its neighbors, and is able to provide the life that the people of Syria want to rebuild for themselves, including many who are abroad, who have expressed a willingness or an interest in returning. And in fact, we've seen some of those people begin to return just because of the U.S. sanctions announcement. But we want that trend to continue because Syria will need them in order to rebuild their country and reclaim it.
Can I talk to you about Gaza? President Trump's laid out a plan for Gaza. You recently said we support a future for the people of Gaza that is free of Hamas and full of opportunity. How do you envision a transition to a non-Hamas security and governance in Gaza?
Well, that's a central question and not an easy one to solve, obviously. We've engaged with partners. There was an Egyptian-led effort for a while. There's a Saudi effort now. We've obviously engaged with our regional partners to come up with the constructs of what that looks like. Not to be frank, I mean, in the midst of the conflict ongoing, most of the attention has been paid to the humanitarian situation and the freeing of the hostages and multiple failed efforts at a ceasefire, which are ongoing and continue, and the hopes of ending this and the cessation of hostilities at some point. But thought has been given to it. But I think at the core of it is, I think we can find the funds to do it. I think you can find the partners to do it. I think the central question for the future of Gaza is going to be who governs it. Because as long as there's a group like Hamas there, it's going to be very difficult to envision long-term peace and prosperity. So whether it's Hamas or some successor organization that spins out of it, that has to be a factor that you eliminate. And one of the ways you prevent it is by having a governing authority on the ground in Gaza that can provide the security necessary to allow there to be the peace necessary so you can have the prosperity we hope for.
I want to talk, last question, in terms of American energy. Last year the Biden administration chose to pause approvals of pending LNG exports. We know that Europe needs those. It created a lot of uncertainty. President Trump has promised in his unleashing American energy, he's removed a lot of the obstacles. Our LNG exports have surged. I think it's going to help in Europe. European countries have increased their purchases of U.S. LNG. How has lifting this pause that Biden put on here restored confidence in America as a reliable partner to Europe?
Well, obviously, I was just commenting a moment ago, I believe on Saturday, the first LNG shipment reached Italy. And there are other countries that are building terminals to receive it as well. So the fact that the United States joins now in the world as a reliable, long-term source of liquefied natural gas as an export, I think improves our ties and our partnerships around the world. And it's a need for us because we have the capacity to export it and to develop it, and it's a need for our allies who need to diversify and in some cases make less dependent their system of generating electricity. It's a fundamental problem for multiple countries, for example, in Europe. It's not just the energy they need now, it's the energy they're going to need in the years to come. If you do an audit of where they're going to wind up needing, they don't have any way to generate that now unless they rely on things like U.S. exports of LNG. And that alone even won't be enough. They're going to have to find some other resources as well.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Keep up the great work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barrasso. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, you and I served together in Congress for 15 years. We didn't always agree, but I believe we shared some common values. A belief in defending democracy and human rights abroad, and honoring the Constitution at home. That's why I voted to confirm you. I believed you would stand up for those principles. You haven't. You've done the opposite. And you used to speak with conviction about the importance of foreign aid as a tool to advance American values and interests. Then you stood by while Elon Musk took a chainsaw to USAID and other assistance programs. That has left a staggering toll. Broken trust with countries, openings for China and other adversaries, and countless preventable deaths of children and others. Take Sudan, for example. The freezing of U.S. humanitarian assistance forced the closure of nearly 80% of the emergency food kitchens there. 2 million famine-affected people were left without access to food. People died because of those actions. Mothers, fathers, and children. Tons of emergency food that could have saved their lives was left rotting in warehouses because you and Elon Musk refused to let USAID do its job. Sudan is a country where, by the administration's own determination, a genocide is unfolding in Darfur. But here's where it goes from cruel to despicable. While cutting off food aid to Sudanese families living through an actual genocide, you're fast-tracking white South Africans for refugee status under a manufactured claim that they are the victims of genocide. You tried to block the admission of individuals who had already been approved to come here as refugees while making bogus claims to justify granting such status to Afrikaners. You've made a mockery of our country's refugee process, turning it into a system of global apartheid where political ideology and race, more than truth or need, matter. And while you've turned away from a genocide in Sudan and invented one in South Africa, you teamed up with President Trump to throw the Ukrainian people under the bus and have been played like a fiddle by Vladimir Putin. Of course, Donald Trump not only said he would end the war in Ukraine on day one, he also said he would end the war in Gaza on day one. And yet last week, you were all running around to Gulf states, giving away very sensitive American AI and chips technology, but doing nothing to end the war in Gaza and get the remaining hostages returned. You know that for 78 days, the Netanyahu government did not allow a scrap of food to enter Gaza to reach over 2 million civilians. 57 children have died from malnutrition so far, and more than 14,000 children are in imminent danger of dying of starvation. As Cindy McCain said last week, and I quote, "Families in Gaza are starving while the food they need is sitting at the border." That is a gross violation of both U.S. and international law. What did you do? Nothing. Not once did you publicly call upon the Netanyahu government to end the blockade. Fortunately, other countries spoke out, and now we see a tiny trickle going in. Where have you focused your energy instead, Mr. Secretary? Well, your first trip as Secretary of State was to El Salvador, not to promote democracy, but to cozy up to President Bukele, who calls himself the world's coolest dictator. The result was a cash for collusion deal to deprive people living in America of their constitutional rights to due process. The Supreme Court, in a 9-0 decision, instructed you to facilitate the return to the United States of Abrego Garcia, who the administration admitted was wrongfully deported to El Salvador. Your response? You've openly flouted judicial orders. When asked whether you have been in touch with El Salvador to return Abrego Garcia, you boasted, quote, "I would never tell you that. And you know who else I would never tell? A judge." Clearly, you don't care about the Fifth Amendment right to due process, and you don't care about the First Amendment either, since you've been very busy snatching students off of college campuses for exercising their right to free speech. You dredged up a relic from the McCarthy era to claim that student protesters posed a threat to the foreign policy of the United States. Give me a break, Mr. Secretary. You know as well as I do this isn't about national security. It's about punishing free speech. And you know that in America, the government doesn't get to use its power to punish speech it doesn't like. Yet in March, you boasted about revoking student visas, saying, and I'm quoting, "We do it every day. Every time I find one of these lunatics, I take away their visa," unquote. Let's look at one of those lunatics, Mr. Secretary, Ms. Ozturk. Her crime was co-authoring an op-ed in her college paper critical of Tufts University's response to the war in Gaza. Your own department found zero links to terrorism, no anti-Semitic statements, but you still yanked her visa and shipped her off to detention in Louisiana. And the list goes on and on. The federal judge in the case of Mohsen Madawi, who is the Columbia student who was ambushed by federal agents at his citizenship appointment, said, and I quote, this is the judge, "Legal residents not charged with crimes or misconduct are being arrested and threatened with deportation for stating their views on the political issues of the day. Our nation has seen times like this before, especially during the Red Scare and Palmer raids. Like the McCarthy-era witch hunts of the 1950s, your campaign of fear and repression is eating away at foundational values of our democracy. Back then, it took one voice, Attorney Joseph Welch, to cut through the hysteria with the simple question that marked the beginning of the end of that shameful era. He asked Senator McCarthy, "Have you no sense of decency?" And I would ask you the same, Secretary Rubio. But you have shown through your words and your actions what the answer is. And I have to tell you directly and personally that I regret voting for you for Secretary of State. I yield back.
May I respond?
You may sit.
Well, first of all, your regret for voting for me confirms I'm doing a good job, based on what I know.
Well, that's
about
just
your
a
record and
flippant
what you
statement,
stand
Mr.
for.
Secretary.
Can I respond, Mr. Chairman?
You may.
I didn't ask.
Senator,
question.
please let the secretary have
I'd be
the floor.
happy to, but then I can respond to his.
Your
response.
time's up, Senator, and willfully used, I might add.
Well-
your remarks do not represent the view of this committee.
Well, Mr.
Secretary, please.
Well, I'd like to. I can't respond to everything he said because much of these are untrue, but I'll go through a few. First of all, I'm actually very proud of the work we've done with USAID. For example, I don't regret cutting $10 million for male circumcisions in Mozambique. I don't know how that makes us stronger and more prosperous as a nation.
I
don't regret
Sudan,
psychosocial support services.
I raised
USAID.
Sudan, Mr. Secretary.
Can I respond,
not
Mr.
Senator,
Chairman, or do I?
Senator, I'd ask you to suspend. You had 7 straight minutes.
I chose to
railing on-
use my time that way, Mr. Chairman. That's my right to
Please
use
suspend,
my time that way.
Secretary Rubio.
Well, I can go on. I mean, there's other things here. We spent $227,000 for Big Cat's YouTube channel from USAID. We spent $14 million for social cohesion in Mali, whatever the hell that means. So I can go on and on. I got the list here, and there's more. I didn't even bring the whole list. In the case of El Salvador, absolutely. Absolutely. We deported gang members, including the one you had a margarita with. And that guy is a human trafficker, and that guy is a gangbanger, and the evidence is going to be clear. In the days to come, you're going to see who you went to
look,
defend.
I'm sorry,
please,
Mr. Chairman.
Secretary Rubio has the floor.
Mr. Chairman, he can't make unsubstantiated
Senator,
comments like that.
Secretary Rubio has the floor. You had
Secretary
your time.
Rubio should take that testimony to the federal court
Senator,
of the United States because
well,
he hasn't done it under oath.
Here's another point, okay? There is a division in our government between the federal branch and the judicial branch. No judge in the judicial branch cannot tell me or the president how to conduct foreign policy. No judge can tell me how I have to outreach to a foreign partner or what I need to say to them. And if I do reach to that foreign partner and talk to them, I have under no obligation to share that with the judiciary branch. Just like a judge cannot order me to negotiate with a foreign minister of Russia, they cannot order me to negotiate with a foreign minister or the president of El Salvador. And if I did negotiate with them, which we have responded to them, and we've told them, we've had communications with the president of El Salvador. I am under no obligation, under our division of powers in this country, and to share with the judicial branch how I conducted diplomacy of the United States. It would actually be counterproductive. If I started sharing with courts, or frankly, with the media, my conversations with foreign leaders and all of their details, no foreign leader would talk to me again, and we would break trust with them. So I have complied with every court order. What I won't comply with is an order to disclose what I'm saying and what we're talking about with a foreign leader, because then they won't talk to me. Diplomacy doesn't work that way. About the student visas, let me say this. I don't deport anybody, and I don't snatch anybody. The State Department does not have officers in the street snatching everybody. What I do is revoke visas, and it's very simple. A visa is not a right. It is a privilege. People apply for student visas to come into the United States and study. And if you tell me that you're coming to the United States to lead campus crusades, to take over libraries and try to burn down buildings and acts of violence, we're not going to give you a visa.
Is that what Ms. Ostork did?
We're not going to give you a visa.
Is that what she did? Come
that,
on, Mr. Secretary.
And every single
You're
one of
just
these
blowing
cases, the
smoke
factors
here
are
now.
different.
Senator,
the bottom line is, if you're
Senator,
coming here to stir up trouble on our campuses, we will deny you a visa. And if you
Does
have
the
a
First
visa
Amendment
and we find
apply
you,
to
we'll
people
revoke
living in
it.
the United States?
And we're going to do more. There are more coming. We're going to continue to revoke the visas of people who are here as guests and are disrupting our higher education facilities. People are paying money. These kids pay money to go to school, and they have to walk through a
Writing an
bunch of
op-ed
lunatics
to the
who are
tough
here on student
newspapers
visas.
disrupting the
Simple
foreign
as
policy
that.
of the United
I want to
States.
do more. I hope we can
That's
find more of these people.
pathetic, Mr.
In fact, the other
Secretary.
day, some guys led a riot. I forgot what university it was, and I asked, please, can you find the arrest records of all the people that were arrested at that riot at that campus? Because if any of them have a visa, we're going to revoke it.
I feel so much safer
All right,
when you lock
let's,
up people like Ms. Ostork, Ms. Secretary.
We've had enough time on the subject. Thank you very much. And we're going to move to Senator Lee.
Mr. Secretary, it's very good to have you back here. I want to say it's good to see the fauna in its natural habitat, but it's more like its former habitat, because your current one is also where you naturally belong. And I, for one, I know a majority of us feel the same way, have every confidence in your ability to serve us and are very grateful for your service. One of the many things that I've always liked about you and I always agreed with you on is your clear-eyed vision for the Western Hemisphere. You seem to share the understanding that many of us have, which is that we've been blessed as a country throughout our 250-year existence by the fact that we're protected by a big ocean to our left, another big ocean to our right, and friendly neighbors to our north and south. Those natural barriers are good for us and gave rise to the Monroe Doctrine and things like that. And I appreciate the fact that we now have a Secretary of State who understands and appreciates the importance of the Western Hemisphere. So I want to ask you where the Western Hemisphere fits relative to other regions of the globe and, with the current administration. Now, as I understand it, the America First Opportunity Fund is intended to support, quote, America's most enduring and critical partners. As you, as Secretary of State, work to realign State Department priorities and funding programs with our national interests, will the countries in our immediate periphery, those in our hemisphere, our neighbors, be counted among our most critical partners?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, by the way, the new Prime Minister of Canada was here a couple weeks ago. We had a very productive engagement with the President. Their new foreign minister is coming on board, wasn't able to join us at the NATO gathering a few days ago, but look forward to interacting with her as well. We've obviously had some disagreements with Canada in regards to the nature of trade between our countries. But I think there's hope here that we can work something out on the trade front with them, although that's not something that I'm involved in negotiating. And then we have a lot of other mutual interests. As an example, national security, on our shared obligations to NORAD and the defense of the North American continent. They've been a strong partner, and we look forward to building on that. And one of the most encouraging things is that Canada, that has historically not spent a lot of money, at one point less than 1% of their GDP on the military, it's now increasing, has made a pledge to get to 2% and has signed on to the NATO pledge to get to 5% over the next decade. So I think that's going to strengthen our partnership as well in providing security to our hemisphere.
Thank you. I want to touch next on the contributions to international organizations account. This multi-purpose account has been used to facilitate U.S. payments to over 40 international organizations. I think the current tally might be at 44. Now, as someone who has been skeptical of international organizations in the way we fund them, the way they've been used, and the way they've used our money, I very much welcome the proposed reduction in funding of international organizations. But the budget request before us mentions only the UN in that context, not the dozens of other organizations that we're also funding. As you keep up your efforts to review our participation in and funding of international organizations, can you offer us some kind of a glimpse into the universe of organizations as to which we might be terminating our funding this year?
Well, I think there are some already that we have with UNRWA and some of the other programs that we are not happy with what they do. But the assessment is very simple, and that is our participation in this organization further our national interests or not? It doesn't mean we have to agree with everything the organization does, because sometimes there's benefit to being at the table. Sometimes there's benefit to being there and being able to influence the direction that it's going. In other cases, these are just forums that are used for anti-American positioning, but we're paying for it. So you start to ask yourself, well, why are people? And in other cases, you're legitimizing it. So you look at the Human Rights Council at the United Nations, which basically doesn't do anything to sanctions. In fact, it has become a place where some of the worst human rights violators on the planet go to hide. And yet we're funding that, and we're participating and giving it credibility. So I do think there are agencies like this. And here's one that I would say, because you asked about the Western Hemisphere, and I'm not saying it's one of the ones we're going to walk away from. I'm not claiming that right now. I am saying this. We have a catastrophe in our own hemisphere right now in Haiti that we are seeking to come up with an alternative strategy, because the one that's in place right now isn't working. And Haiti's heading in a very bad direction very quickly. And everyone's bending themselves twisting themselves into pretzels to try to figure out how can we get the United Nations or some other entity to fly a flag over the country that you could put a mission that deals with it. And I asked myself, the Organization of American States has not led a mission since 1965, I believe. Why do we have an Organization of American States if it is unable to collectively respond to what is a severe catastrophe in our own hemisphere? Again, I'm not threatening we're going to pull out of the OAS. And that's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is we need to challenge some of our existing memberships to step up. Because you would think that one of the reasons why the OAS exists is to deal with a crisis like the one we have in Haiti, which is not like a crisis anywhere else, because these are not warring ideological movements. This is a country being taken over by criminal gangs. Or in fact, much of it's already been taken over by criminal gangs, and you have to deal with that very differently. And I want to say one thing here publicly. We are grateful to the Kenyans and to the mission. We remain committed to it because they've done it at great sacrifice and risk, but that mission alone will not solve this problem. And so that is one example of something that I want to see us be able to lead on, and that is to get organizations like the OAS, which we contribute to quite a bit, step forward and provide a mission with countries, member countries, to deal with the issue of Haiti, which is about to take a very dramatic turn if not addressed very quickly.
That's a great point. I'm glad you raised OAS. I know that Lee Rizzuto, who's been named by President Trump to be our ambassador to that organization, has a vision that aligns closely with that of the President and of you, our Secretary of State. Now, the Biden administration used the Development Finance Corporation as yet another vehicle for pursuing international climate alarmism with U.S. funding. Under the Biden administration, the DFC committed $20 million for sustainable tilapia production in Kenya, $50 million to purchase new vehicles for a car rental business in Ukraine, and $350 million for wind power in Turkey. These are just a few examples. As the Trump example seeks to lean on the DFC as an alternative for foreign aid, what sorts of projects and in which regions would you advise the U.S. to fund through the DFC?
Well, I think that's first of all, the DFC obviously is independent from the Department of State, so they have an own board and an own governing structure. Although I'm a member of it, I don't control it. But I think the broader question that you're asking is exactly the point of this reorganization, and that is it will now be incumbent upon our regional bureaus and our embassies under those bureaus to identify those opportunities for us, and then to elevate that at the leadership level and say, here's what we need to be funding in this country on the basis of our interaction. For example, in the Caribbean basin, when you talk to leaders there, they will tell you their number one need is to build up the capacity of their local law enforcement so they can take on these gangs. If they can get control of the gangs and the security situation, then they can expand to economic development and things of that nature. But it's difficult to do as long as it's insecure on the ground. These are the kinds of things that we want to be able to pursue, which is why we want to empower the regional bureaus and our embassies to have a role to play in determining what we fund and what we put our money towards.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I see my time's expired. Thank you, Secretary Rubio.
Thank you, Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to get right into it for a moment. So as a mother, a senator, and a fellow human being, I can tell you that I'm not even mad anymore about your complicity in this administration's destruction of U.S. global leadership. I'm simply disappointed. And I wonder if you're proud of yourself in this moment when you go home to your family, because I've always found you, Senator Rubio, to be a bipartisan, pragmatic partner, a true believer that the U.S. is stronger when we lead with diplomacy and development. You have a strong record on this, but I don't recognize Secretary Rubio. A stalwart support of Israel, you've watched this administration abandon Saudi normalization with Israel in order to pursue business deals. You were once a fierce critic of Vladimir Putin, but you sat idly by as the president berated the elected leader of Ukraine for not capitulating to Russia. And worst of all, you've kneecapped foreign assistance, including programs that you previously championed and made America less safe, less strong, less prosperous in doing so. I know you know this in your heart, and I can't make this point any better than you did yourself in 2019 when you said, anybody who tells you that we can slash foreign aid and that will bring us to balance is lying to you. So with that, I'm just going to move on to my questions. Thank you. And I'm going to talk about international women's issues because during your time as senator, you were a champion of international women's issues. You helped introduce bills that would have codified the Department's Office of Global Women's Issues and Women's Global Development Prosperity Initiative. You supported several bills, including Senator Shaheen's Bipartisan Women, Peace, and Security Act. During your confirmation hearing, you committed to me that you would support women's economic empowerment abroad. And at this year's International Women of Courage Award, you waxed poetically about the administration's support for women abroad. So help me understand how to square your past with your present. You're proposing the full elimination of the Office of Global Women's Issues. You've terminated hundreds of programs that help women and girls. You provided no guidance to the department on whether they should continue to implement the Women, Peace, and Security Act, and I'm still waiting to see your support for women's economic empowerment overseas. How can you dismiss the concerns of women around the world? Do you believe that the data shows that women's economic participation includes greater economic development worldwide, and that women's participation in peace negotiations guarantees longer outcomes? And I have a few questions, so I would respectfully ask for a yes or no. Don't you think that women's participation is important and allows for better outcomes?
This is not a game show. I'm not going to ask that with a yes or no. That's an important question. And I can answer it. We're not abandoning women's issues.
So do you believe the Office of Global Women's Issues should be eliminated?
One thing is to eliminate an office. Another thing is to eliminate the function. The function will still exist. It'll be driven at the regional bureaus. So every one of our regions will have someone who's looking at and driving that issue, and right down to the embassy. It remains a priority. The same with the law that you outlined that I supported. This is going to be executed on, but it's going to be executed at the regional level and at the embassy level. And the reason why is because the challenges facing women in Africa are different than the challenges facing women in Central America.
And I have your commitment that you're going to support women around the world, because without the women being able to be successful in their countries, I believe we can't have peace, stability, and our countries move forward.
Sure, and it remains part of our agenda. It's just going to be, the service is still going to be delivered, but it's going to be delivered at the regional and embassy level, not through a standalone office in Washington, D.C.
When will we see the reports on this and how this will be delivered?
Well, this is what we're engaged in with this committee now, which is our reorganization process. We've made an initial presentation to the committees. It's not final. We've received input through the comment period, including from our own building, but also from members of Congress on both sides, and meaning the House and Senate. Now we'll come back to you based on all of that input on what we propose to be the final reorganization.
Do you have a timeline when you'll come back? Because I don't want to see women left behind around the world, and I think you'd agree with me. But I'm going to turn on to Israel. If you can give us a timeline of when you're proposing to do this, that would be helpful, and we maybe come back and revisit it, Mr. Chairman. Do you have a timeline of when?
Sure, we're engaged now. I think we'll owe you a congressional notification here within the next few weeks, which is but all of that is being built on the comment period, in which we've taken input from staff and members of this committee, as well as in the House.
Thank you. Can I move on to Israel for a second? So the Office of Security Coordinator in Israel, the OSC, was established by President Bush in 2005. The OSC is widely respected, including by the IDF Central Command, for facilitating security coordination between the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli security forces, which has been crucial in preventing terrorist attacks against Israelis. However, it's reported that you plan, again, to eliminate OSC, which I believe, and many others, could lead to further destabilization in the West Bank and threaten Israel's security. So, Mr. Secretary, should the U.S. continue playing a role in facilitating successful security coordination between IDF and Palestinian security forces to safeguard Israeli lives? And if so, do you believe the State Department should continue to maintain the OSC and support it financially?
Yeah, there's news reports every day about things that aren't true. So the only thing that's been discussed about OSC is whether it should be brought under the authority of the ambassador and the embassy.
You're not proposing eliminating. Thank you. We'll move further on this discussion. With my minute left, I'm going to talk about vaccines abroad, because Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, we are so proud, has prevented nearly 19 million children's deaths since it was created by providing vaccines to 50 countries. Diseases, they don't know borders. So a small investment from the U.S. can save American lives by stopping outbreaks really before they reach our shores. You were previously a champion of global vaccines, twice leading resolutions in support of continued U.S. investments in these programs. So, Mr. Secretary, again, do you consider vaccines, including for malaria, Ebola, to be life-saving? Given Gavi's proven track record of saving lives, preventing global disease outbreaks that could reach our borders, will you commit to prioritizing continued U.S. support for Gavi?
But we haven't canceled U.S. support for malaria or any of these other communicable diseases and or vaccines. What we have, there are some individual programs that may have been canceled because they weren't being delivered in the appropriate way. All of these functions will continue. The difference now is the function will be happening under the Department of State, as opposed to a set-alone entity, which you had very little oversight over, by the way, in this committee, even though we tried in the years that I was on it with USAID. And I don't want to, I may respond to one point you made just because I'm curious. We have not abandoned Saudi normalization with Israel, as you pointed. The Saudis are the ones that have expressed their inability to move forward on it so long as the conflict is happening in Gaza. But we would love to see normalization.
You know, when it comes to the Saudis and normalization, and we can have this as I'd be so happy to have you in my office or come to your office and talk about this. It was quite apparent on the last trip that the president was more interested in making business deals and trying to move forward peace in the region. It's not just about the business deal. There's a lot going on, and there is pressure to bear. But we did receive a list, I just want to say for the record, that showed Gavi was terminated. And so if you could send us something to show that it's turned back on, we'd be glad to see that. I know I'm over my time.
Senator Scott.
All right. Secretary Rubio, first off, I'm proud to have voted for you. I wish you were in the Senate, but I'm proud that you're Secretary of State, and I can tell you, Floridians are very proud of you. As you know, Miami-Dade, finally, for the first time in history, is now more Republican than Democrat. I'm sure they looked at you and saw all the success you've had, so one of the reasons it happened. Can you talk about what you're trying to accomplish with your reorganization and how that's going to improve national security?
Well, ultimately, the goal of reorganization is to make the State Department, put State Department at the center of our foreign policy, which people will look at and say, well, how, isn't that what it's always been? But it actually had lost that role. And one of the reasons why it had lost this role is inability to deliver quickly. In essence, the inability to deliver quickly on whatever policymakers determined they wanted them to do, and there were structural reasons for that and the like. The other thing is that we are now in an era that requires, I think every era has required this, but now more than ever, a foreign policy that's cohesive, where all the elements of national power, including soft power, which has been talked about here today with foreign aid, but also the hard work of diplomacy, of understanding that sometimes when you're dealing with another nation state, they're not going to behave the way you would want your country to behave, but it's in our national interest to have a relationship with them and be able to influence discrete decisions that they make on one topic or another. And all of this has to be coordinated, and that wasn't happening. We had functional bureaus that were basically in charge of some human rights issue, and then we had an embassy. And oftentimes when you would travel abroad, you would find that our embassy and or our regional bureau and our functional bureau were at odds with one another, because the functional bureau was pushing one agenda, the embassy was pushing another, and this was also true with USAID. By the way, this idea that USAID got along well with the State Department is false. And embassy after embassy, during my time in oversight, you would hear complaints about how USAID was funding programs that State Department had no insight into and in many ways contradicted what the State Department was driving at the embassy level. So what we're asking for now through this reorganization is to bring it all under one roof so that we can conduct foreign policy at the regional and local level in a way that's cohesive and concise and can deliver results. But it's also where you're going to get the best ideas from. I read cables from our missions around the world every single day. Some of the most important information that I get as Secretary of State is not from intelligence reports, it's not from news articles, it's not from briefings from somebody. It is from a cable that comes directly from that embassy that is identifying a problem and or an opportunity that I may not hear about for months if it ever makes its way through the system. So we want to empower that, because that's our front lines. These are the people that are on the ground every single day dealing with the government, dealing with society, and they're identifying opportunities and problems months, if not years, in advance of what Maine State or others are identifying. So the goal of reorganization is to shorten that time frame, because we can't afford to move slow. The world moves very, very quickly. This decision we made on Syria, had we run that through a traditional process, would have taken months and months and months of interagency this and people talking that and all the different boxes that have to be checked in some memo that gets to me. Our ability to move quickly on a discrete, on a unique opportunity in a time-effective manner, I think is going to bear dividends for the national security of our country if it works out. And we want to be able to see more of that. And that's really the goal of reorganization. People think this is a cost-cutting exercise. There may be savings. There need to be savings. We just had our credit rating downgraded. You talk about a foreign policy problem? That's the first thing our foreign interlocutors wanted to mention to me on Sunday in Rome, is that our credit rating was just downgraded. We have a debt problem, but that's obviously not a State Department issue, but that's our problem. But that's a problem. But this is not just about cost savings. This is about providing a more efficient, faster-moving, more effective State Department and as a tool of diplomacy. The State Department should be at the center of American foreign policy making. And that's our goal, to create one, to reorganize one that can deliver on that.
I want to thank you and President Trump for your focus on Latin America. Can you tell me, what do you think the proper role of the Organization of American States is? What should they be doing?
Well, you would think that they would be able to be a forum to deal with challenges in the region. none more pressing right now than what's happening in Haiti. I mean, Haiti's basically been taken over by a coalition of gangs who they're not interested in governing the country. They're not interested in running the country. They just think if there's no government, we're in charge of this territory, and from here we can do all the drug running and organ smuggling and human smuggling, all the stuff we want. And that's what they're trying to do, and that's what they're doing. That's a very unique challenge. Our traditional peacekeeping missions are designed to keep ideological groups from fighting each other, or tribal groups from fighting each other, or in many cases nation states from fighting each other. But that traditional approach is not going to solve this very unique challenge. It is a country basically taken over by 25 to 30,000 individuals who are members of criminal gangs who simply want to control territory so they can hijack trucks, steal and or charge exorbitant fees for fuel to move across the country, kidnap people and traffic in humans, traffic in drugs across the border into the Dominican Republic and through sea-bound lanes. And there's things that we need to do. For example, we need to figure, and we've been working with the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, the ATF, and others, on how can we cut the flow of guns that are leaving the Miami River on containers and reaching not just Haiti, but Jamaica and Trinidad and other places. So there's more we can do on that front. But from the OAS's perspective, if ever there was a regional crisis that you would think an organization like this could step forward and provide a force or a group of countries that working together could help solve, it would be the OAS. And we're prepared to play a leading role in that. But we do need buy-in from other partners in the region who are as affected, if not more so, by what's happening there. So that's one example of what the OAS should help on. And obviously the other is on the defense of democracy, which is the OAS is a collection of democratic institutions. In places like Nicaragua, there is no. In Venezuela, in Cuba, there is no democracy.
Can you talk about how you're working to reform the foreign service officer recruitment?
In terms of reforms? Well, two things we're doing. On the promotion board, we're not getting rid of the promotion board. I read some of the other day. We have simply suspended it for a month while we reevaluate how we promote people. We want to promote people on the basis of how good they are. I know this is a shocking view, but we want to promote people on the basis of how good they are. And frankly, on occasion, you will find that a more junior officer, meaning they've only been there 10 years instead of 20, is really good and deserves a promotion. And if you don't promote them, they're going to leave the Foreign Service. The same is true for how we recruit people. We want to widen the base of people. And in fact, one of the things we've thought about is, are there people in the middle of a career doing something else in the private sector that are interested in entering diplomacy? There was a program to do that back in the 1980s, and it was very successful. Maybe these are people that will give us 15 or 20 years in that regard. So we are looking to expand our talent pool, but ultimately, we are also seeking to have a system internally where we are rewarding merit and performance, and not simply seniority or where you are in the pecking order based on how long you've been there. And that doesn't mean that if you've been there a long time, you're not good. But it means there are some people that haven't been there as long that are just as good or not better. And we want to make sure they're promoted, because if not, we're going to lose them. We're going to lose them to the private sector.
Thank you. You're doing a great job.
Senator Booker.
Thank you very much. Marco, first of all, I just want to say I agree with what you said about it being a foreign policy crisis, the great debt and the downgrading that we just saw. To be pushing a bill right now that would add $2.7 trillion to our national debt is just outrageous. And I've been grateful for the small group of Republicans here in the Senate and a number in the House who have just called this out as plain as it is. To do this now will shake America's economy, give tax breaks to the wealthiest amongst us who are doing quite well, and not help with the current economic crisis we're facing. But that's frankly just something I didn't want to talk about right now. Where I really want to just continue our conversation about Sudan. And I know you know, as was said passionately by one of my colleagues, the gravity of the crisis that's over there. Full stop. It's the greatest humanitarian crisis on the planet Earth. There's ethnic cleansing going on, an active genocide as described by our own government and others. And people are fleeing right now with the recent attacks on Zamzam and more, but I know you're very aware of this. What I want to ask you about specifically is that not only did you acknowledge the genocide and say, I quote, being backed by countries that we consider allies elsewhere in the world. This is being fueled, you were saying. We must draw a clear line on that. You specifically mentioned the UAE, and you said, and I quote, take UAE, for example. They are an important partner in the Middle East, but we must be clear they are currently supporting an entity that is carrying out genocide. I'm just wondering, have you been able to draw that clear line in your conversations with the UAE, specifically addressing the issue of the supplying of arms?
Well, again, and I wasn't satisfied when people would answer this way when I was sitting on that side, but now on this side with diplomacy, you always want to be careful what you say publicly, because then people don't want to talk to you if they think it's going to happen in the future. Let me say this we have expressed, not just to the UAE, but to other countries, that they are turning it into a proxy war, that it's destabilizing the region, that in fact it's creating an environment, not just in Sudan, but it's threatening to South Sudan already faces pretty substantial challenges, but some of that threatens to spill over and make it even worse.
If I can interrupt, Marco, because I think your answer is justifiable. The UAE is a vital ally to the United States in a lot of other critical areas of the world.
But it doesn't serve their interest. My point is, it doesn't serve the interest of some of these countries involved to continue to pursue this route, because instability there is going to create a breeding nest for
And I guess what my hope is,
radicalism.
and I know you and I can have further conversations privately, is that we are pressing hard on those people that are fueling the conflict. But I want to ask the next part of this question is, the U.S. leadership is critical to end this. This is actually something that we can achieve, not only alleviation of the suffering, but an end of this. If a humanitarian corridor is created and respected, this is something we can help to do. Finding diplomatic resolution to the conflict is something we can do. Now, there's a bipartisan a commitment in this committee, mandate to appoint a special envoy for Sudan. We know that kind of leadership can help address this the worst crisis on the globe. Time is not in our favor. Are you going to get a special envoy appointed, as colleagues on both sides of this aisle want to happen?
We do. We want to. We'd love to have somebody in charge of that. We have a similar arrangement with DRC, Rwanda, and have seen it play dividends.
Mr. Secretary, all I'm looking for is a sense of urgency and an answer yes.
Yes, the answer is, but we have to find the right person, and that's the challenge.
Next, 30 million people in Sudan require humanitarian assistance. In February, it was reported that, and you heard this passionately, that the freeze in humanitarian assistance is causing untold suffering. I was there myself in Chad last year and saw the role that we were playing. And frankly, I saw how great American companies like Plumpy Nut here were doing good, a double bottom line. They were helping to alleviate the crisis over there, as well as helping American businesses here. I just am hoping that you can say that you will commit to resume and even surge United States humanitarian assistance, particularly food aid, as soon as humanly as possible.
Well, all of that has been approved. All of the life-saving food and medicine programs have been turned on. To the extent that there's been impediments, has been one or two things. Either A, on the payment system front, where we faced a couple of weeks where we couldn't get money moving through Treasury because of a variety of different reasons, including changes to the technology, but that's largely been resolved. And the other is the ability to distribute it once the aid arrives at site.
Marco, Mr. Secretary, you and I have been friends for a very long time. A sense of urgency is what I'm asking for right now. That every day that we delay or that we don't plow through the line of defense here, that's stopping this from happening. People are dying. I know you, and I know we can do better. And as you and I both were taught back in the days we were playing football, if better is possible, good is not enough. I want to move to my next question for you. Is the refugee camps, the U.S. main corridor to life-saving assistance, which I said to you I visited, I'm just hoping that we can make sure that we are doing more. And I'll be specific in an example of another area. Despite the escalating humanitarian crisis, the United Nations Humanitarian Air Service is vital. The termination of those flights, makes it likely that all of Chad's aid into Chad will stop and end, and they will have no resources by the end of July. It can take a week to reach Chad's border from the capital via motorcade. And so this is a vital lifeline that we were supporting. During the rainy season, you can't make that trip by road at all. And I know, again, that you know this. Why was the award terminated for these flights? It is, to me, this is just very plain. This is the lifeline. And it was denied a waiver, which we reached out for. It's just, again, a very plain way that we could save lives. And I'm not sure if it's just because it had the UN in the title, but can we get a resumption of these flights that will literally save lives by getting resources?
I think the answer to your question is that while you were talking about a mode of transport versus the actual aid, and I understand how important that is, then the question is which what percentage of responsibility the United States should bear in comparison to other countries that have capability and are actually closer to the problem. So there's a broader issue here, and that is there does come a point at which we have to understand that the United States, there's great causes all over the world. And I'm not speaking specifically about the flight because I owe you a specific answer on that question. I don't recall that waiver. I don't recall the denial.
Marco, that's all. Excuse me, Mr. Secretary, that's all I'm looking for.
But all I want you to understand is that not every program we've ever funded is going to be funded in the future because we have to balance these things.
Mr. Secretary, I am aware of that. I just want an answer. I mean, this is like Schindler's List. Doing a little more saves lives. And I know we are more capable than we are right now. And I'm asking for that answer.
I'll get you the answer on the flights.
And the flights and some of the other things I mentioned. And I'm happy to work with you on the special envoy. There are people on both sides that are willing to do that. And I'll say in conclusion, because I'm over, but other people did, I do not want to lecture you, especially because I know I've had enough conversations that I know your moral core. But what my colleague brought up very passionately about the Afrikaners, I want you to know as a person that talks to countries and leaders like you do all over Africa, they are already seeing us not prioritizing ambassadors. They see embassies being closed. But the torrent I got on the Afrikaners reminded me of the torrent I got from African leaders when the president called those countries like those in Africa shithole countries. The anguish and the anger and the disappointment and the feeling of double standards. So just from a diplomatic range, where we're in a competition in many ways on that continent, that you and I talked in your confirmation hearings about the profound moral urgencies, economic opportunity, security mandates, the cooperations with these countries. We have got to do a better job, in my opinion, and I've worked with you on these issues when you were a senator, diplomatically in prioritizing these issues. And I will partner with you in any way possible to make sure that we are addressing what I believe is a diplomatic shortfall right now in advancing American interests on the continent.
If I might just real quick, we haven't closed any embassies, so I think people are responding to like articles talking about the potential for embassy closures and things of that nature, but we haven't closed any embassies, and we have been engaged. Listen, Africa, to me, is one of the priorities that I've set for us in terms of our global view because of the opportunities, because of the youth of the continent, because of explosive growth that we're going to foresee. And as an example of it, one of the things we prioritized, which a lot of people thought was intractable, was trying to reach a peace agreement between the DRC and Rwanda. Now, it's not done, but we brought them both here to Washington, D.C. about a month ago. They signed a memorandum of understanding. The negotiations are moving forward. They're actually moving forward very well. Our hope is to arrive at a peace deal there that ultimately ends what was turning out to be a very brutal and difficult conflict. So I take your point on Sudan and the need for an envoy. We would love to find the right person to handle that portfolio because it has to be the right person. And we have played a supportive role. For example, the UK, about a month and a half ago, led a Sudan summit in London for a day, where a lot of other countries, we sent someone, we've offered to be helpful and work with them on it, but a lot of other countries either didn't make commitments or didn't live up to the commitments. The summit sort of was a minor disappointment because while everyone talks a big game around the world about it, they're not stepping up. But I take your point. I'll get you your answer on the flights because I'm not aware of that specific waiver. And on the envoy, we'd love to work with you to find the right person.
And the ambassadors and other things I'll reach out to your office on.
Senator Cornyn.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'm proud of my vote for you to confirm you as Secretary of State. We all know you well, having worked with you for many years. We know of your the qualities that you bring to this job, and I think you're exactly the right person for this job in a very dangerous and turbulent world. When I look at what you and the administration has done just it's May the 20th. January the 20th, President Trump was sworn into office, but just a few of the things that have happened during that time, obviously the critical minerals deal in Ukraine, the Pakistani-Indian conflict, which could have resulted in a nuclear conflict between two nuclear-armed countries, things back closer to where I live, the Mexican water deal that was negotiated with Mexico. I'm frankly amazed at your stamina and what you've and the administration have been able to do in a short period of time. And listening to some of the criticism that I've heard this morning, it reminded me of a quote from NFL quarterback Aaron Rodgers talking about dealing with criticism, things he wished he had known when he was younger. And he said, never listen to criticism from somebody that you never would have taken advice from in the first place. But let me ask you specifically about two issues. One has to do with Ukraine and peace negotiations. I applaud you and the administration, and particularly President Trump, for initiating these negotiations between Ukraine and Russia and try to bring a peace, or at least a ceasefire, between these warring countries. This is enormously dangerous, as you know better than most, because it could easily spill over into the rest of Europe, result in NATO becoming involved and the like. But I wonder what you believe Mr. Putin's motivations are. Do you think that he is engaging in these negotiations in good faith, that he intends to give something in order to get something, or not?
Well, I think that's, on the question of Putin, I think that's still an open question. I think he approaches it, we have to assume, from a cold, calculated cost-benefit, nation-state evaluation of what's in the best interest of his view of Russia. What I'm pretty certain of is this is not the war he thought he was getting. When he first invaded Ukraine, I think he anticipated that the government would collapse and that he would be greeted as a liberator, and it has not turned out that way. And in fact, Russia today controls less territory than they did after the first 2 months of the war. So they've suffered significant losses. They've suffered the losses of at least, by some estimates, 250,000 men in uniform, and the Ukrainians have suffered less, but nonetheless suffered as well. It is a battlefield today in which the front lines move 10 kilometers at a time in one direction or another. Even if they're advancing at a tremendously high cost. But the challenge Russia faces now is their entire economy is built around the war effort. Their entire economy is built around munitions production and, frankly, around the fact that you've deployed about 1 million to 1.5 million people to the front lines, and they're making a lot more money fighting a war than they would in the private sector. So I think that that's potentially a challenge here in terms of bringing this war to an end. What we've tried to do is find any way forward to end this conflict. We think it is costly, it is deadly, it is disruptive, and we want to see it end. We want to see it end because of the destruction to Ukraine. We want to see it end because of the strains it's placing on the budgets of countries, neighboring countries, and the fears that it's stirring up in their regard. We want to see the conflict end in a way that's enduring. Meaning not a peace that lasts 3 months and then restarts again, but something that's enduring, that both sides could live with for a long period of time without it restarting again. And that's hard. There's a reason why. This an effort that I wish would have started 2 years ago, but it's starting now. We've done the best we can because we are able to talk to both sides. Obviously, only one side is getting American aid, and only one side is receiving American sanctions. But nonetheless, we think it's important to preserve our ability to talk to both sides. The president is fully aware and has intimated on a number of occasions that he has options available to him in the sanctions field that he could pursue if, in fact, he determines that Putin is not interested in negotiating. But by the same token, I think the president is very committed to ending the dying, ending the bloodshed, ending the destruction, and he wants to preserve, as long as he possibly can, the opportunity to influence both sides towards peace. The minute you do certain things, your influence over one of the two sides to at least lead to peace really diminishes. And then we're back to where we were in January when he went into the White House, which is with no one had a clear path forward. I mean, there had been no... The first time Russians and Ukrainians have actually met directly and spoken was 3 days ago in Turkey. They had not spoken since the Istanbul process in 2022 had failed. So there are 1,000 prisoners that are going to be released from both sides from a humanitarian standpoint. That's good. What we haven't seen yet is moves towards peace. It's our understanding that the Russians are going to write up terms for what they would require in order to reach a ceasefire that then would allow broader negotiations. We await those terms, and then we'll have a much better understanding about Mr. Putin's calculation once we see what those terms look like.
So to quote you, the jury's still out.
These are complex conflicts, obviously, that are difficult to bring to bear, and there are a lot of other things playing at stake. But I do think that whatever offer Russia puts on the table, if in fact they do, as they said they were going to do, they put an offer on the table and say, if this happens, we agree to a ceasefire and further negotiations, I think that offer will tell us a lot about their intent here in the short term.
Well, I applaud your and President Trump's efforts to try to bring a ceasefire and hopefully a peaceful outcome to this terrible bloodshed, which has devastated both sides, the Ukrainians and the Russian people. Since you wear multiple hats, including as the archivist and Secretary of State, one of those that you wear is as National Security Advisor, and I want to talk a little bit about the Indo-Pacific and the threat that we face from a potential conflict there. I am delighted to hear President Trump repeatedly say he believes in peace through strength. And I think that is exactly right. I think that's exactly the right approach. But I worry that the United States and our allies are not ready for what could be a conflict initiated by President Xi as early as 2027, when he's instructed the People's Liberation Army to be ready to take Taiwan. General Douglas MacArthur said these words which sort of haunt me in this connection. He said, "The history of failure in war is almost always to be summed up in two words: too late. Too late in comprehending the deadly purpose of a potential enemy, too late in realizing the mortal danger, too late in preparedness, too late in uniting all possible forces for resistance." I don't believe we are ready at this point, but can you share with us your view and the administration's view of what we need to do in order to establish that deterrence that comes from peace through strength in the Indo-Pacific?
Yeah, in the most simplistic terms, we have to make the benefit of a Taiwan event for China, we have to make the benefit of it less than the costs. In essence, it has to cost more than what it's worth in order to do something like that, and deterrence is the key to that regard. And I think deterrence obviously begins with Taiwan's own self-defense capabilities. And the harder they are to take militarily, the more time I think they buy for themselves in that regard. I think it continues by having a credible regional deterrent, not just the United States, but Japan and other allied countries around the world, and an increased interest in the Indo-Pacific, by the way, from our European allies. I was at the NATO Foreign Ministers gathering over the last week in Turkey, and multiple member states raised their concerns about the Indo-Pacific and what it would mean for the European continent if there were a conflict there. So I think that also underpins why it's important. We have to understand that any time there's a conflict in the Middle East or a conflict in Europe or what have you, that we have to dedicate resources and time to that. That's time and resources that we're not dedicating to the Indo-Pacific. We would like to be able to do all things everywhere, but the fact of the matter is there are finite resources and there's only 24 hours in every day. And so it would be of great benefit if we were able to conclude the war in Ukraine and with Russia and Ukraine, if we were able to establish some stability and peace in the Middle East, if we were able to deal with these issues, it would allow us to focus more time, energy, and frankly resources on some of the challenges we face in the long term with regard to the Indo-Pacific and other parts of the world, but particularly the Indo-Pacific.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome back. When you were last testifying before this committee, you and I talked about water in South Texas, and we talked about the 1944 Water Treaty. As you know well, South Texas has, for the last 4 years, faced a severe drought, and that drought has been substantially exacerbated by the conduct of the government of Mexico, and in particular, its repeated and flagrant violations of the 1944 Water Treaty. Under that treaty, Mexico is obligated to provide 350,000 acre-feet of water each year to South Texas. Mexico was breaking that treaty, and there were 1.3 million acre-feet of water in arrears. As a consequence, South Texas is facing a massive drought. South Texas farmers are putting out of production up to half their acreage. They're laying off workers. Last year, the only sugar mill in the state of Texas closed because sugar farmers could not get the water to grow their crop. And you committed at that hearing to work with me and assist in pressuring Mexico to comply with that treaty. In the months since then, you have followed through on that commitment. You have leaned in vigorously with the government of Mexico. Your deputy, Chris Landau, has done the same thing. Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins has done the same thing. And then critically, President Trump put out a public statement on Truth Social, making clear to Mexico that there would be serious consequences, sanctions and tariffs if they did not comply with the water treaty. I will say, as a result of the president's leadership and your hard work, we've had a major victory for South Texas, and Mexico has committed to providing 400,000 acre-feet of water, which is desperately needed. So I want to just start by saying thank you. In 4 years under Joe Biden, the Biden administration would not lift a finger for Texans, for farmers in South Texas, to hold Mexico to account, and the Trump administration has done more in 4 months fighting for water in South Texas than Joe Biden did for 4 years. So I wanted to say thank you, and I wanted to ask how the State Department is approaching next steps on the 1944 Water Treaty.
Well, first of all, we have to understand that that commitment is met, and then we have to begin to prepare for the next cycle. This is a one-year problem. So we want to continue to work on that to make sure that those commitments are made, and that then in the next cycle, this becomes made permanent, that in essence, this becomes a new standard operating procedure and not a one-off. And by the way, it has to be something that exists beyond the presidency of the current president, because if the next president doesn't prioritize it, it could go back. So I just think this continued engagement with them on our expectations. The truth of the matter is, and in fairness, the Mexican government has grown increasingly cooperative on a number of fronts, both on national security issues and common security issues, but also on issues such as this. We're also happy, I think there's also the new treatment plant that they've opened, the Tijuana wastewater one, that we think will also be very helpful to water issues in the region and also to water quality issues. But this was a good news story. I think it's what happens when you make something a priority and then follow through on it. But we have to sustain it, and that really is our focus now, to sustain this through for future cycles, not just the short term.
So, and I'll tell you, earlier this year, I went down to the Rio Grande Valley with Secretary Rollins. And in December, I wrote a provision in the continuing resolution that provided emergency relief to South Texas farmers, $280 million. And Secretary Rollins came down. Now, Brooke is the first Texan ever to be the U.S. Agriculture Secretary, and she's the first Ag Secretary in history to go to the Rio Grande Valley. And Secretary Rollins and I did a roundtable, and I will say, you and I have both been very focused on the Hispanic community in particular. I will say the impact in the Rio Grande Valley of having a president and an administration that is fighting for them is enormously consequential. And so I was very grateful that she came down, and the farmers and ranchers in South Texas see that they've got a president and an administration that's fighting for them. Let me shift to a different topic. Today, South African President Ramaphosa is in Washington, D.C. He'll be meeting with President Trump tomorrow. You and the president, as well as other administration officials, have repeatedly and rightly criticized South African policies on issues ranging from human rights to activities that directly undermine American national security. Those activities, in turn, include what appears to be an explicit and extensive pivot away from the United States and towards the Chinese Communist Party. There are also serious and credible allegations that the South African government's decision-making is compromised by widespread corruption tied directly to Iran. They are working together to target our Israeli allies on the international stage. President Ramaphosa himself has taken an aggressive position, leading a charge of genocide against Israel in the International Court of Justice. And he has pushed for precedents and policies that will not just undermine Israel, but expose American officials to vulnerabilities as well. I have every confidence that President Trump will demand South African officials change their policies and will hold them accountable if they don't. And it's critically important for the American people to understand the bases for our policies. Please talk a little bit about the extent of South Africa's malign activities and how they are undermining American national security interests.
Well, it's one of the, first of all, we chose not to participate in this year's G20 hosted by South Africa, either at the foreign minister level or the president's level. And it had a lot to do with some of these issues in addition to some of the issues they brought on their agenda, which we don't think reflect the priorities of this administration. So the president of South Africa is here today because he says he endeavors to reset relations between our countries. And President Trump if someone says that, is always going to be open to resetting relations. But it will have to touch on some of the issues just pointed to now. Obviously, the position they've adopted towards Israel is way, not just off balance, but completely geared towards one side, and it makes one wonder about these allegations that are out there now of foreign influence, including with Iran. They clearly, on the global stage, and multiple multinational organizations have consistently been a vote against America's interests, time and again. Not one-off. You always understand when some country has to go in one direction opposite to you, because, you know, that happens. That's what diplomacy is ultimately about. Diplomacy is also about when we're aligned, we work together. When we're unaligned, we have to talk. But when one country is consistently unaligned with the United States on issue after issue after issue after issue, now you have to make conclusions about it. So all I could say about the meeting today, I'm not there, obviously, because I'm here with all of you. In fact, it may be going on right now as we speak, or was scheduled to go on as we speak, is this was an outreach on the part of the South African president. He said he wanted to come to Washington. He wanted to reset relations with the United States. I have no reports as to how that meeting has gone so far. If there's a willingness on their side to reset relations, obviously was something we'll explore, but we do so with eyes wide open to what they've done so far.
And how does their campaign against Israel undermine America?
Well, I think, first of all, because it echoes some of the charges that are being made by some of the biggest enemies of Israel that happen to be ours, whether it's Iran, whether it's these radical groups that chant death to America, death to Israel. So we're very concerned about that. I also think there's real concern in our mind about some of these international institutions that, frankly, South Africa has lined up strongly behind, who would seek to, if they could, jail, imprison, indict American office holders because of some of the positions we've taken on public policy, even though we're not members to the conventions that create these entities. So if you talk about these groups they are in essence utilizing their forum on the national stage as a nation state under this president and this leadership to echo the claims and the positions taken by not just Iran, but in many cases China as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. Marco, thank you. I can confidently say I speak for the majority of this committee when I tell you how proud we are of what you're doing and your success as Secretary of State and the other hats you wear, too many of which there are to reiterate here. And I'm sorry that there were intemperate remarks here, as happens from time to time in the committee, but you know how that goes. You've served here. But thank you. There may be some questions for the record, which the members can submit until 5 o'clock tomorrow night. And we hope your responses will be as quickly as possible to any of those. With that, again, thank you so much for appearing here. Thank you for your time. I have finally figured out how to stop the protests from happening here. They haven't happened, except when you've been here. So maybe there's some way we can, maybe there might be some reference between the two. In any event, thank you so much. And with that, the committee is adjourned.